Hello and welcome. The day is done and it's time to slow down. Take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and let yourself become comfortable. Before we begin, I'd love to know, what time is it where you are, and where in the world are you listening from tonight? Thank you for spending part of your evening here. Now settle in, breathe deeply, and let's drift into tonight's peaceful story. Every evening, just after sunset, a silver moon rose above the hills surrounding the village. It appeared slowly, first as a pale glow behind the mountains, then as a bright circle climbing into the darkening sky. The villagers rarely paid much attention to it. They had seen it their entire lives. To them, it was simply part of the world, like the river, like the wind, like the changing seasons. But one boy saw the moon differently. His name was Kaito, and from the time he was very young, he believed the moon was the most beautiful thing in existence. While other children chased butterflies or climbed trees, Kaito sat quietly watching the sky. He watched the moon rise, watched it travel across the night, watched it disappear at dawn. The sight filled him with wonder, yet wonder gradually transformed into something else, a longing, a desire, a need. The older he became, the stronger it grew. Eventually, Kaito convinced himself of something unusual. He believed he would never be truly happy until he reached the moon. At first, people laughed. Children often dream impossible dreams. But Kaito never abandoned the idea. As a teenager, he climbed hills hoping the moon would seem closer. When he reached the top, it remained far away. As a young man, he traveled to distant mountains. Still, the moon stayed beyond reach. No matter how far he walked, the distance never changed. Yet this only strengthened his determination. If I can just get a little closer, he told himself, then I will be satisfied. Years passed. Kaito became known throughout the region as the man chasing the moon. Travelers shared stories about him. Some admired his dedication, others considered him foolish. Most simply found him strange. Meanwhile, life continued happening around him. Friends married, families grew, children were born, harvests came and went, seasons changed. Yet Kaito remained focused on the moon. Always the moon, always somewhere else, always just beyond reach. One spring evening, while traveling through a forest, he encountered an elderly monk sitting beside a small pond. The old man appeared perfectly content. He sat quietly watching reflections ripple across the water. Kaito barely noticed him. His eyes remained fixed on the moon rising above the trees. The monk smiled. "You seem determined." Kaito nodded. "I am. What are you seeking?" "The moon." The old man looked up. "It is beautiful." "Yes." Kaito's eyes brightened. "You understand." The monk chuckled softly. "Perhaps." Encouraged, Kaito sat down. For nearly an hour, he explained his dream, his years of searching, his travels, his certainty that happiness awaited him somewhere beyond the next mountain. When he finished, the monk remained silent. Then he pointed toward the pond. "What do you see?" Kaito looked. "The moon." The reflection shimmered upon the water. The old monk nodded. "Can you reach it?" The young man frowned. "Of course not." "Why not?" "Because it's only a reflection." The monk smiled. Then he asked, "How do you know the moon in the sky is different?" The question annoyed him. "Because it is real." The old man nodded. "Yes." Then he looked at Kaito kindly. "And what will happen when you reach it?" The answer came immediately. "I'll finally be happy." The monk smiled gently. "Will you?" Kaito felt irritation rising. He had not traveled all these years to have his dream questioned. The old man seemed unconcerned. Instead, he picked up a small stone and dropped it into the pond. Ripples spread outward. The reflected moon shattered into fragments, then gradually reformed. The monk watched quietly. Interesting. Kaito crossed his arms. What is? The moon remained unchanged. The old man pointed toward the sky, but the reflection became disturbed. The conversation made little sense, so Kaito left the next morning and continued his journey. Yet the monk's questions followed him, especially one: what will happen when you reach it? For years, he had assumed the answer, yet he had never examined it carefully. The assumption felt obvious. Reach the moon, become happy, simple, wasn't it? Several months later, Kaito arrived in a large city. The city contained everything he once imagined would bring fulfillment: wealth, entertainment, famous teachers, beautiful buildings, endless opportunities. He decided to stay. Perhaps the moon had only been a symbol. Perhaps happiness lived here instead. At first, the city excited him. Everything felt new, interesting, promising. But eventually, the excitement faded, as excitement always does. The city remained impressive, yet the emptiness remained too. Soon, Kaito found himself dreaming of something else: a distant mountain, a hidden monastery, a different future. The pattern felt strangely familiar. Whenever he reached one destination, another appeared. Whenever he obtained one desire, a new desire emerged. The finish line kept moving, like the moon. One evening, while walking through the city, he noticed a wealthy merchant sitting outside a grand house. The man looked miserable. Several servants attended him. Gold decorated his clothing. His garden stretched across an entire hillside, yet his face seemed exhausted. Kaito found himself surprised. How could someone possessing so much appear so unhappy? Later that week, he met a poor gardener working beside a temple. The gardener owned almost nothing, yet he laughed easily, smiled often, and seemed genuinely content. The contrast unsettled him. The gardener had less, yet appeared happier. The merchant had more, yet wanted even more. The pattern reminded him of himself. Several years passed. Kaito continued searching, not only for the moon, for satisfaction, for completion, for the feeling that something was finally enough. Yet the feeling never arrived. One autumn evening, while crossing a mountain pass, he encountered the same monk beside another pond, or perhaps another monk entirely. Age makes some people resemble one another. The old man smiled as though expecting him. "You are still traveling?" Kaito laughed. "You remember me?" The monk nodded. "The man chasing the moon." This time, Kaito sat willingly. The years had softened some of his certainty. For a while, they watched the sunset together. Finally, the monk asked, "Have you reached it?" The young man smiled sadly. "No." The old man nodded. "And are you happy?" Kaito considered carefully. "Sometimes. Only sometimes." The monk smiled. "That is already wisdom." Silence settled between them. The moon slowly appeared above the mountains. Its reflection emerged upon the pond. The old monk pointed toward the water. "What happens if you chase the reflection? You never catch it. Why? Because it moves whenever you move." The monk nodded. "And desire often behaves the same way." The words landed deeply. For the first time, Kaito truly understood. His suffering had never come from wanting beautiful things. The problem was believing those things would permanently complete him. Every achievement promised lasting satisfaction, then faded. Every possession promised fulfillment, then became ordinary. Every goal promised a rival, then revealed another destination. The moon itself was not the problem. The illusion was. The belief that happiness existed somewhere else, somewhere ahead, somewhere not yet reached. Over the following months, Kaito remained with the monk. He helped tend the garden, fetched water, prepared meals, meditated. At first, he found the simplicity difficult. His mind constantly searched for something more important, something bigger, something extraordinary. Yet gradually, he noticed something surprising. Peace appeared during ordinary moments, while sweeping leaves, while drinking tea, while watching rain fall upon the roof, while listening to birds at dawn. The moments he once overlooked contained a quiet richness, not because circumstances had changed, because attention had changed. One morning, while carrying water from a stream, he suddenly stopped. The realization arrived without warning. For years, he had treated the present moment as an obstacle, something to endure while pursuing happiness elsewhere. The future, the next destination, the next achievement, the next moon. Meanwhile, life itself had been happening here, all along. The insight felt both beautiful and heartbreaking. Beautiful because it revealed freedom. Heartbreaking because of how much time he had spent looking away. Years later, Kaito returned to his village. Many things had changed. Children had become adults. Adults had become elders. Some people were gone. New faces appeared. The moon still rose above the hills exactly as before. One evening, he sat watching it with several village children. One young boy pointed toward the sky. "I wish I could reach the moon." The others laughed. Kaito smiled. Then he asked, "What would happen if you did?" The child thought carefully. "I'd be happy." The answer sounded familiar, very familiar. Kaito looked toward the moon, then toward the fields glowing beneath its light. The wind moved gently through the grass. Crickets sang nearby. The night felt peaceful. Finally he answered, "The moon is beautiful." The child nodded eagerly. "Yes, but don't spend your whole life chasing it." The boy looked confused. "Why not?" Kaito smiled. "Because while you're looking up, you might miss everything around you." The child followed his gaze. The fields, the trees, the stars, the people sitting beside him. For a moment, everyone remained silent. The moon continued shining, exactly where it had always been. And perhaps that is the lesson. Desire itself is not the enemy. Without desire, we would never learn, never grow, never explore. The problem begins when we believe fulfillment exists only in the next achievement, the next possession, the next relationship, the next destination, the next version of ourselves. Like a man chasing the moon, we spend our lives running towards something that always appears slightly farther away. Meanwhile, the present moment waits patiently. Not perfect, not permanent, but real. The Buddha taught that craving often creates suffering because it places happiness somewhere else, always somewhere else. Yet peace begins when we stop demanding that life become different before we allow ourselves to experience it. The moon remains beautiful. Goals remain valuable. Dreams remain worthwhile. But perhaps we can admire the moon without chasing it. Perhaps we can walk toward our goals without believing they will complete us. Perhaps we can appreciate what is here while still moving forward. For happiness is rarely waiting at the end of the journey. More often, it appears quietly beside the path when we finally stop running long enough to notice it. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. There once lived a king named Haruto, who possessed nearly everything a person could imagine. His kingdom stretched from the sea to the mountains. His treasury overflowed with gold. His armies were strong. His palaces were magnificent. Travelers crossed continents to witness the beauty of his capital city. From the outside, his life appeared perfect. If happiness could be purchased, surely King Haruto would have been the happiest man alive. Yet every night, when darkness settled across the kingdom and the city fell silent, the king faced a problem no wealth could solve. He could not sleep. At first, the difficulty seemed minor. A few restless nights, an occasional interruption, nothing unusual. But over time, the sleeplessness worsened. Hours passed without rest, then entire nights, then weeks. The king became exhausted. His temper shortened. His patience vanished. His thoughts became cloudy. Physicians were summoned. The finest healers in the kingdom arrived. They examined him carefully. They prescribed herbs, special teas, rare medicines. Nothing worked. Musicians were invited to perform soothing melodies. Nothing worked. Perfumers filled his chambers with calming fragrances. Nothing worked. His servants replaced mattresses, blankets, pillows, curtains, and furniture. Nothing worked. The king remained awake, night after night. As months passed, the situation became desperate. The king grew obsessed with finding a cure. Ironically, this obsession made sleep even more difficult. Every evening he wondered, will I sleep tonight? What if I don't? What if this continues forever? The questions chased him through the darkness. One night, unable to bear the palace walls any longer, Haruto wandered through the gardens. Moonlight covered the stone paths. The fountains murmured softly. The world seemed peaceful. Everyone else appeared asleep. Only the king remained awake. As he walked, he noticed an elderly gardener sitting beneath a pine tree. The old man appeared perfectly relaxed. A small lantern rested beside him. His eyes were half closed. He seemed completely content. The sight irritated the king. How could a gardener possess the peace that had abandoned a king? Haruto approached. "Why aren't you sleeping?" The gardener opened his eyes, then bowed respectfully. "I was enjoying the night, Your Majesty." The king frowned. "Enjoying it?" "Yes." The gardener smiled. "The moon is beautiful." Haruto found the answer absurd. He sat down heavily beside the old man. "I have not slept properly in months." The gardener nodded. "I know." The king looked surprised. "You do?" "The entire kingdom knows." The old man spoke gently. "People worry about you." The king stared toward the moonlit pond. Then, unexpectedly, he confessed something. "I have everything. Yes. Wealth. Yes. Power. Yes. Comfort. Yes." The king's voice softened. "Then why am I miserable?" The gardener remained silent for several moments. Finally he asked, "What do you want?" The question seemed ridiculous. "I just told you." "No." The old man smiled. "You told me what you have." The king considered, then answered, "I want sleep." The gardener nodded. "And after that?" The king frowned. "What do you mean? When you sleep well, what will you want next?" Haruto opened his mouth, then paused, because the answer arrived immediately. A larger fleet, stronger trade routes, a neighboring territory, greater prosperity, more influence, more security. The list continued endlessly. The gardener watched quietly. Eventually he asked, "When does it end?" The king had no answer. The following day, Haruto could not stop thinking about the conversation. When does it end? The question followed him through meetings, through meals, through ceremonies, through every moment of the day. That evening, he summoned the gardener. The old man arrived carrying a small wooden box. The king looked at it curiously. "What is that?" "A gift." The gardener opened the box. Inside sat a simple clay cup. Nothing more. The king laughed. "A cup?" "Yes." The gardener handed it to him. Haruto turned it over. It looked ordinary, plain, almost worthless. "I don't understand." The gardener smiled. "Fill it." The king called for water. A servant filled the cup. The gardener nodded. "Good." Then he asked, "Can you fill it more?" "No." "Why not?" "It's already full." The old man smiled. "Exactly." The conversation felt strangely familiar to the king's earlier question. The gardener continued. "A full cup receives nothing." The king looked at the water, then back at the gardener. "What does this have to do with sleep?" The old man smiled sadly. "Your life is already overflowing." The king remained silent. "You have spent decades filling your cup." The gardener pointed gently toward the palace. More wealth, more land, more power, more security, more success. His voice softened. "And now your mind has forgotten how to stop reaching." The words landed heavily, because they felt true. Even in moments of triumph, the king immediately searched for the next achievement. Every victory produced another goal. Every accomplishment created another desire. Nothing remained enough for very long. Weeks passed. The king became increasingly aware of this habit. Whenever he received good news, his mind immediately moved beyond it. The harvest exceeded expectations. How can next year's harvest be larger? Trade expanded. How can trade expand further? The treasury grew. How can it grow faster? The pattern never stopped. One afternoon, while reviewing accounts, he suddenly realized something startling. He had not genuinely enjoyed a success in years, not because success was absent, because he never stayed with it. The moment one desire was fulfilled, another appeared, like a traveler reaching the horizon, only to discover another horizon beyond it. That evening, he sought the gardener again. "Is desire the problem?" The old man shook his head. "No." The king looked surprised. "No." Without desire, no seeds would be planted. No journeys would begin. No one would learn. The gardener picked up a fallen leaf. "The problem is not desire." He let the leaf drift into a stream. "The problem is believing fulfillment lives in the next desire." The king sat quietly. The gardener continued. "Have you ever noticed what happens after obtaining something you desperately wanted?" The king thought carefully. The answer was obvious. The excitement faded. Always. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but always. Then a new desire appeared. The cycle repeated. For the first time, Haruto saw his sleeplessness differently. Perhaps sleep itself was not the real issue. Perhaps his mind had been trained to pursue endlessly, even at night, especially at night. Months passed. The king began changing small things. He spent less time discussing expansion, more time walking through gardens, less time calculating future gains, more time noticing present blessings. At first, these practices felt unnatural. His mind constantly rushed ahead. Yet gradually, something shifted. One morning, while eating breakfast, he realized he was actually tasting the food, not planning, not calculating, simply eating. The experience felt strangely peaceful. Another evening, he watched a sunset from the palace walls. Years had passed since he last watched an entire sunset without interruption. The sky turned gold, then orange, then deep violet. Nothing was accomplished, nothing was gained, and yet the moment felt complete. The gardener smiled when he heard about it. Good. The king laughed. Good. Very good. Why? The old man replied, You were somewhere other than tomorrow. Years continued passing. The kingdom prospered, but something even more important happened. The king slowly learned contentment, not permanent contentment, not perfect contentment. Human beings rarely experience such things, but enough to breathe, enough to rest, enough to appreciate. One evening, while sitting beside the same pond where he first met the gardener, Haruto noticed something. He felt tired, pleasantly tired, not exhausted, not anxious, simply tired, the way a person feels after a full day. The gardener sat beside him. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, the king said, I think I understand. The old man smiled. What? I spent my entire life chasing the next thing. The gardener nodded. And? Haruto looked at the moon reflected in the water. The next thing never arrived. The old man laughed softly. Of course it didn't. The king smiled. Because whenever it arrived, it became the current thing. Exactly. Silence returned. The night felt peaceful. The water remained still. The moon shone quietly above them. That night, for the first time in many years, King Haruto slept deeply. Not because all his problems disappeared, not because he finally controlled the future, not because he acquired something new. He slept because, for a few precious hours, he stopped reaching. The Buddha often taught that craving resembles drinking salt water. The more we consume, the thirstier we become. Not because the water is evil, because it cannot satisfy the thirst we imagine it will. Many people spend their lives chasing one more success, one more possession, one more achievement, one more victory, believing the next thing will finally create peace. Yet the mind trained to seek endlessly rarely stops on its own. The finish line keeps moving. The horizon keeps retreating. The cup keeps demanding more. Until one day we pause long enough to notice something. Perhaps this moment is already enough. Perhaps peace is not waiting beyond the next achievement. Perhaps it has been quietly available all along, like sleep waiting for a restless king to stop chasing tomorrow long enough to rest in today. And perhaps that is the lesson. The cost of endless craving is not merely exhaustion. It is the life we miss while pursuing what comes next. For the person who always wants more may eventually gain the world and still remain awake at night. But the person who learns contentment discovers a treasure greater than gold. The ability to rest, the ability to appreciate, the ability to be here. And in that simple enoughness, a kind of freedom appears that no kingdom can provide, and no loss can easily take away. The valley of Green Hollow stretched between rolling hills and distant mountains. Rich grass covered the fields. Clear streams crossed the meadows. Farmers had worked the land for generations. The valley was peaceful, predictable, steady. And among the many animals living there were two who could not have been more different. The first was an old ox named Taro. The second was a young horse named Casey. Taro moved slowly. Case moved quickly. Taro spoke rarely. Case spoke constantly. Taro had spent nearly 20 years working the valley fields. He had pulled plows through droughts, carried loads through storms, crossed rivers during floods, travelled roads few others remembered. Time had left its marks upon him. His coat was no longer glossy. His muscles were not as powerful as before. His pace had slowed considerably, yet his eyes remained calm, deep, patient. The kind of eyes that had seen many seasons. Kay's, meanwhile, represented everything young, strong, fast, energetic, confident. His legs seemed built from pure motion. Standing still felt almost impossible. He loved racing across open fields, testing his speed, showing off whenever an audience appeared. The younger animals admired him, and Kay's enjoyed being admired very much. One summer morning, while grazing near a stream, Kay's watched Taro slowly crossing a field. The old ox moved carefully, one step at a time, unhurried. The young horse laughed. "You walk like winter." Taro glanced toward him. "What does winter walk like?" "Slow," the old ox smiled. "Perhaps." Kay's trotted closer. "You should move faster." "Why?" The question surprised him. "Because it's better." Taro lowered his head and resumed grazing. The answer seemed obvious to Kay's. Speed was better. Youth was better. Strength was better. What else mattered? The old ox did not argue. He simply continued eating. Several days later, a farmer announced important news. A new grazing area had been discovered beyond the mountains. The land contained rich grass and fresh water. The problem was reaching it. The route passed through unfamiliar terrain, dense forests, rocky paths, steep slopes. Few animals knew the way. The farmers decided to send several animals ahead to scout the journey. Kay's immediately volunteered. The opportunity sounded exciting. Adventure, exploration, new territory. What could be better? Several younger animals volunteered too. Then the head farmer made an unexpected decision. Taro would lead the group. The announcement shocked Kay's. "The old ox?" The farmer nodded. "Yes." The horse frowned. "He is too slow." The farmer smiled. "Perhaps." The answer felt unsatisfying, yet the decision remained. The following morning, the journey began. At first, everything seemed easy. The weather was pleasant, the trail clear. The younger animals moved eagerly. Kay's repeatedly raced ahead, then returned, then raced ahead again. His energy seemed endless. Taro maintained the same steady pace. One step, then another, then another. The consistency annoyed the young horse. After several hours, he trotted beside the ox. "You could move faster." Taro smiled. "I could." "Then why don't you?" The old ox looked toward the distant mountains. "Because the journey is longer than the morning." Kay's rolled his eyes. Another old animal answer. Mysterious, unnecessarily complicated. The horse accelerated ahead again. By afternoon, the trail entered dense forest. The trees grew close together. Shadows covered the path. Several routes branched in different directions. The younger animals became uncertain. Which trail was correct? The forest looked identical in every direction. Kay's immediately chose a path. This way. Taro examined the ground carefully, then shook his head. No. The horse frowned. "How do you know?" The old ox pointed toward faint marks in the soil. "Water flows that direction." The younger animals looked confused. Taro continued. "The valley lies beyond the water." The explanation seemed strange, yet after several hours, the old ox proved correct. His route led them safely through the forest. The horse said nothing, but the first crack appeared in his certainty. The following day brought rain, heavy rain. The path became muddy. Several steep sections turned dangerous. At one point, the trail crossed a river. Normally, the crossing would have been easy. The storm changed everything. The water flowed fast. Strong currents pushed against the banks. The younger animals hesitated. Casey studied the river. "It looks dangerous." Taro nodded. "It is." The horse looked surprised. "Then what do we do?" The old ox walked slowly along the riverbank, searching, watching, remembering. Eventually he stopped. Here. The crossing point looked unremarkable, yet the current flowed differently there, smoother, shallower, safer. The animals crossed successfully. Only afterward did Kays ask, "How did you know?" The old ox smiled. "I have crossed many rivers." The answer felt almost disappointingly simple, yet impossible to argue with. Experience had noticed what youth overlooked. As the journey continued, Kays began paying closer attention, not because he suddenly admired the ox, because curiosity replaced certainty. Again and again, Taro noticed things others missed. Changes in weather, signs of unstable ground, safer routes through difficult terrain, places to find water, places to avoid. The old ox carried something invisible, knowledge, not the kind found in books, the kind earned through years, mistakes, successes, failures, observation, time. The realization slowly transformed the young horse's perspective. Several days later, the group encountered their greatest challenge. A landslide had destroyed part of the mountain trail. The normal route no longer existed. Steep cliffs blocked one side. Loose rocks blocked the other. The younger animals became anxious. The destination seemed impossible to reach. For the first time, Kays felt genuine uncertainty. The old confidence no longer helped. Speed no longer helped. Strength no longer helped. Everyone looked toward Taro. The old ox remained calm. He studied the mountain, the rocks, the trees, the terrain. Then he nodded. "There is another way." The horse frowned. "How do you know?" The answer came quietly. "Because this is not the first mountain." The words carried more weight than before. Because now Kays understood. Experience's memory organized into wisdom. The old ox had seen similar problems before, perhaps not identical, but similar enough. The group followed him. Hours later, they emerged safely beyond the damaged trail. The destination finally appeared ahead. Rich grass, fresh water, beautiful land. The journey succeeded. That evening, the animals rested beneath the stars. The mood felt celebratory. Everyone spoke excitedly about the future, the grazing land, the successful journey, the adventure. Eventually, Kays approached Taro. The old ox sat quietly near the edge of camp. For several moments, the young horse said nothing. Then, "I was wrong." Taro smiled. "About what?" The horse laughed. "Many things." The old ox waited. "You move slowly." "Yes, but somehow you arrive." Taro chuckled softly. The younger horse continued. "I thought strength was everything." The old ox nodded. A common mistake. Silence settled between them. Then Kays asked, "What is more important?" The old ox looked toward the stars, then answered, "Knowing when to use your strength." The lesson stayed with the horse for the rest of his life. Years passed. Kays matured. His speed remained impressive. His strength remained considerable. Yet something else developed too. Patience, perspective, humility, the qualities he once dismissed. Eventually, younger animals began admiring him, the same way others once admired only his speed. One spring morning, a young colt approached him. The colt spoke excitedly, confidently, certain he understood everything. The conversation felt strangely familiar. Kays smiled, because suddenly he saw himself, Many years earlier, the young colt eventually pointed toward an elderly mule grazing nearby. "He is too slow," Kays laughed. The memory returned immediately. Then he answered, "Perhaps." The colt looked pleased. Then Kays continued, "Maybe you should walk beside him." The youngster frowned. "Why?" The older horse smiled. "Because some roads are easier to understand after someone has already traveled them." Late in life, Kays often visited the grazing fields beyond the mountains, the same fields he helped discover years earlier. The journey there remained beautiful. The trails remained challenging, and every time he crossed a river or navigated a difficult path, he remembered Taro. The old ox had long since passed away, yet his lessons remained alive. The best teachers often continue teaching long after they are gone. And perhaps that is the lesson. Youth possesses many gifts: energy, strength, creativity, courage. These qualities matter deeply, but experience offers gifts of its own: perspective, patience, judgment, understanding, the ability to recognize patterns hidden beneath appearances. The Buddha often taught that wisdom grows through direct experience, not merely through knowledge, not merely through theory, through living, through observing, through making mistakes and learning from them. The old ox and the young horse reminds us that age is not merely the passing of years, it is the accumulation of lessons. Some people grow older, few grow wiser. Those who do become valuable guides for others, and wisdom flows best when youth and experience walk together. The young provide energy, the old provide direction. Neither is complete alone, for speed can move us quickly, but wisdom helps us move in the right direction. And often, the animal moving slowest sees the path most clearly. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. There once lived a woman named Aya who carried more than anyone could see. From a distance, she appeared ordinary. She lived in a small village between green hills and a winding river. She worked hard. She cared for her family. She greeted neighbors politely. Nothing about her seemed unusual. Yet inside her mind, Aya carried a burden heavier than any traveler's pack. She carried tomorrow. Not tomorrow itself, of course. No one can carry time. She carried worries about tomorrow, and the day after, and the week after that, and the year after that. Her mind lived almost entirely in futures that had not yet arrived. When she woke in the morning, she worried about afternoon problems. When afternoon arrived, she worried about next month. When next month arrived, she worried about next year. The habit had become so normal that she rarely noticed it. She simply assumed this was what responsible people did. Prepare, plan, anticipate, worry, repeat. Her husband often noticed. One evening, while they shared dinner, he smiled gently. "You look troubled," Aya sighed. "I am thinking." "About what?" She immediately began listing concerns: the harvest, the weather, the roof, their savings, their children, the possibility of illness, the possibility of hardship, the possibility of failure, the possibility of possibilities. By the time she finished speaking, the meal had grown cold. Her husband listened patiently, then asked, "Are any of those things happening right now?" Aya frowned. "What do you mean? Right now?" The woman looked around. The house stood. The food sat before them. The children laughed in the next room. The evening remained peaceful, yet her mind was already somewhere else. She sighed. "You never worry enough." Her husband laughed softly. "And perhaps you worry enough for both of us." The answer irritated her, mostly because it contained truth. The following spring, a wandering monk arrived in the village. His name was Ryosen. He was old, very old. His beard reached nearly to his chest. His robe showed countless repairs, yet his eyes held an unusual brightness. The villagers welcomed him warmly. Travelers often brought stories from distant places, wisdom, perspective, entertainment. For several days, Ryosen stayed near the village temple. People visited regularly. Some sought advice. Others simply enjoyed conversation. Eventually, Aya joined them. At first, she only listened. Then she noticed something strange. The monk seemed completely present. When speaking, he listened fully. When drinking tea, he drank tea. When walking, he walked. The quality felt unusual. Most people appeared divided, partly here, partly somewhere else. The monk seemed entirely wherever he happened to be. The difference fascinated her. One afternoon, she finally approached him directly. "Master?" The old monk smiled. "Yes? How do you stay so calm?" Ryosen considered the question, then asked, "Compared to what?" Aya laughed despite herself. "Compared to everyone else." The monk looked toward the village. Children played nearby. Birds moved between trees. The river flowed peacefully. Finally, he answered, "I stopped carrying tomorrow." The words puzzled her immediately. "What does that mean?" The old monk smiled. "Come walk with me tomorrow." The next morning, they followed a narrow path into the hills. The air felt cool and fresh. Wildflowers grew beside the trail. For a while, neither spoke. Eventually, they reached a small stream. The monk sat beside it. Aya waited. The lesson had not yet appeared, or so she thought. After several minutes, Ryosen asked, "What do you hear?" The woman frowned. "The water." "What else?" "Birds." "What else?" She listened carefully. Wind, leaves, insects, the distant sound of livestock. The monk nodded. "Good." Then he asked, "What were you worrying about 5 minutes ago?" Aya blinked. The question seemed unrelated. Then she realized something surprising. She could not remember, not immediately. The old monk smiled. "For a few moments, you were here." The realization unsettled her, because it felt true. Over the following weeks, Aya visited Ryosen regularly. The lessons rarely resembled lessons. Sometimes they sat beside the river. Sometimes they walked. Sometimes they drank tea in silence. The simplicity frustrated her. She wanted answers, techniques, solutions. Instead, the monk kept returning her attention to the present moment. One afternoon, while helping him tend a small garden, she finally became impatient. "I understand being present." The monk nodded. "Good. But problems still exist." "Yes." "The future still matters." "Yes." "Then why do you keep talking about now?" The old monk smiled, then pointed toward a wheelbarrow filled with stones. "Can you carry all those stones?" Aya shook her head. "Too heavy." The monk nodded, then removed a single stone. "Can you carry this?" "Of course." The old monk handed it to her. "What about 2? "Yes." 3? "Yes." Gradually he added more. Eventually the load became difficult, then impossible. The lesson appeared, slowly, clearly. The monk smiled. "Most people carry today's stones." Aya nodded. "Reasonable." Then he pointed toward the remaining pile. "And tomorrow's stones." The woman remained silent. The monk continued. "And next month's stones." "And next year's stones." The realization landed heavily, because she recognized herself immediately. Months passed. The teachings began changing her life, not dramatically, gradually. One ordinary moment at a time. She still planned, still prepared, still acted responsibly. The difference was what happened afterward. Instead of repeatedly carrying future possibilities, she practiced setting them down. The process proved difficult. Her mind resisted constantly. Whenever one worry disappeared, another appeared. The habit had existed for years, perhaps decades. Breaking it required patience. One evening, a severe storm threatened the village. Dark clouds gathered. Strong winds arrived. Many people became concerned, including Aya. The old version of herself would have spent the entire night imagining disasters. This time, she prepared carefully, secured loose items, checked supplies, closed shutters. Then she sat quietly. The storm had not yet arrived. The future remained unknown. The present remained peaceful. The distinction mattered. The storm eventually came, then passed, as storms often do. Several years later, her oldest son prepared to leave the village. An opportunity awaited him in a distant city. The family felt proud and sad. Aya experienced both emotions intensely. The departure triggered countless worries. Would he be safe? Would he succeed? Would he be lonely? Would he make wise decisions? The questions seemed endless. One evening, she visited Ryosen. By now, the monk had become very old. His movements slowed considerably, yet his mind remained clear. After listening carefully, he asked, "Where is your son?" Aya frowned. "At home." "And where are your worries?" The answer appeared immediately. "Everywhere else." The monk nodded gently. "You are suffering from journeys neither of you have taken." The words lingered, not because they removed her concern, because they illuminated it. She loved her son. That would not change. Yet love did not require living permanently inside imagined futures. The years continued flowing. Aya's understanding deepened. Life remained unpredictable. People became ill. Plans changed. Unexpected difficulties appeared. Unexpected blessings appeared too. Again and again, she noticed something remarkable. The future almost never arrived exactly as imagined. Sometimes reality proved easier than expected. Sometimes harder, usually different. The endless rehearsals inside her mind rarely matched what actually happened. One afternoon, while watching clouds move across the sky, she suddenly laughed aloud. A friend sitting nearby looked confused. "What is funny?" Aya smiled. "I've spent years trying to solve problems that never arrived." The friend nodded slowly. "Most of us do." When Ryosen eventually passed away, the entire village mourned. His teachings had touched many lives, yet no one missed him more than Aya. For several weeks, grief accompanied her everywhere. Then one morning, while walking beside the river they once visited together, she remembered something. The sound of water, the movement of wind, the feeling of simply being present. The memory felt less like loss and more like continuation. The teacher was gone. The lesson remained. As she grew older, younger villagers often sought her advice. Many arrived carrying worries similar to those she once carried. One young mother feared everything: illness, accidents, failure, embarrassment, loss. After listening patiently, Aya asked, "What is happening right now?" The woman looked confused. "Nothing," Aya smiled. "Exactly." The lesson continued spreading, one conversation at a time, one moment at a time, much like ripples moving across water. Late in life, Aya developed a habit. Each evening before sleeping, she sat outside her home. The sky slowly darkened. Stars appeared. The village grew quiet. During those moments, she reviewed the day. Not tomorrow, not next month, not next year, only today. What happened? What mattered? What beauty appeared? What kindness appeared? The practice transformed her, because gratitude lives in the present, not in imagined futures. One autumn evening, a grandchild asked, "Grandmother, what is the most important thing you learned?" Aya looked toward the setting sun, then smiled. "The future is a terrible place to live." The child laughed. "But everyone goes there eventually." "Yes," the old woman nodded, "but only one day at a time." The child thought carefully, then smiled, because somehow the answer made sense. And perhaps that is the lesson. Planning is wise. Preparation is wise. Responsibility is wise. But many people unknowingly spend their lives carrying tomorrows that never arrive. They rehearse suffering, imagine disasters, borrow worry from futures that do not yet exist. The burden becomes enormous, not because today is unbearable, because tomorrow has been added to it, and the next day, and the next. The Buddha often taught that suffering grows when the mind abandons direct experience for endless mental projections. The present moment may contain difficulty, but it rarely contains every difficulty we imagine. The future deserves preparation, not residence. We can visit it, plan for it, then return home. Home is here, this breath, this meal, this conversation, this sunset, this step. The woman who carried tomorrow discovered something simple. When tomorrow arrives, it becomes today, and today is the only place life can actually be lived. So put down tomorrow's stones, at least for a little while. The road ahead will still be there when you need it, but the present moment is here now, and it has been waiting patiently for your return all along. High in the mountains, where the clouds drifted slowly across the peaks and the forests echoed with bird song, there lived a Buddhist master known simply as Ryokan. People traveled from distant villages to seek his wisdom. Some came with questions about suffering. Others came searching for peace. A few came hoping to discover the secret to enlightenment itself. Yet those who met Ryokan often left more puzzled than when they arrived. The old master rarely gave long explanations. Sometimes he answered a complicated question with a smile. Sometimes he pointed toward a tree. Sometimes he simply poured a cup of tea and sat quietly while the visitor drank. Many people found this frustrating. One spring morning, a scholar named Hiro arrived at the monastery. Unlike most visitors, Hiro was already well known throughout the region. He had spent years studying sacred texts. He could recite ancient teachings from memory. He had debated philosophers, advised wealthy merchants, and lectured students in several cities. Everywhere he went, people praised his intelligence. Over time, Hiro began to believe there was very little left for him to learn. Still, he had heard stories about Ryokan. Some claimed the old monk possessed profound wisdom. Others said he understood truths that could not be found in books. Hiro found such claims difficult to believe, yet curiosity eventually brought him to the monastery. As he climbed the mountain path, he rehearsed questions in his mind. Questions about enlightenment, questions about reality, questions about the nature of the self, questions so complex that few people could even understand them. If this monk is truly wise, Hiro thought, he will surely be able to answer them. By the time he reached the monastery gates, the morning mist was beginning to lift. The buildings were simple, the garden was small. The stone paths showed signs of age. Nothing about the place seemed extraordinary. A young novice welcomed him and led him through the courtyard. Soon, they arrived at a small wooden room overlooking a valley filled with pine trees. Inside sat Ryokan. The old master wore plain robes and appeared to be arranging flowers in a clay vase. His movements were slow and deliberate. When Hiro entered, Ryokan looked up and smiled warmly. "Welcome," said the master. Hiro bowed politely. "I have traveled a long distance to meet you." "Then you must be tired," Ryokan replied. "Please sit." Hiro sat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence felt uncomfortable to Hiro. He preferred conversation. He preferred ideas. He preferred movement. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Master Ryokan, I have spent many years studying Buddhist teachings." The old monk nodded. "That is good. I have read hundreds of texts." "Very good. I have studied under respected teachers." "Wonderful." Hiro straightened his back. "I wish to discuss enlightenment." "Of course." The scholar felt encouraged. At last, he thought, they were getting somewhere. For nearly an hour, Hiro spoke. He discussed philosophy. He quoted scriptures. He described theories about consciousness. He explained various interpretations of emptiness, karma, and liberation. Every few minutes he paused, expecting a response. Each time, Ryokan simply nodded and listened. The old master seemed neither impressed nor unimpressed. He simply listened. This puzzled Hiro. Surely, he thought, the master should have something to add. Finally, after another long explanation, Ryokan stood. "You have traveled far," he said. "Let us have some tea." Hiro felt slightly disappointed. He had expected a profound discussion. Still, refusing tea would be rude. So he agreed. Ryokan brought a small iron kettle and 2 simple ceramic cups. The room filled with the gentle aroma of green tea. Outside, a breeze moved through the pines. The valley was silent. The old master carefully placed a cup before Hiro. Then he began to pour. Golden tea flowed into the cup. The level rose steadily. Soon it reached the rim. But Ryokan did not stop pouring. Tea spilled over the edge. It ran across the table. It dripped onto the floor. Still the master continued pouring. At first, Hiro thought this must be an accident. Then he realized it was intentional. "Master," he exclaimed, "the cup is full." Ryokan continued pouring. "The tea is overflowing." Finally, the old monk set down the kettle. The room became quiet once more. Tea dripped slowly from the edge of the table. Hiro stared in confusion. Then Ryokan looked at him gently and said, "Like this cup, you are already full." The scholar frowned. "What do you mean?" The old master folded his hands. "You have filled yourself with opinions, conclusions, knowledge, and certainty." Hiro felt a sudden irritation. "Knowledge is valuable, is it not?" "Very valuable," Ryokan replied. "But if a cup is already full, how can fresh tea enter?" The scholar had no immediate answer. For the first time since arriving, he found himself completely silent. Outside the window, a single bird sang from somewhere deep within the forest. The sound lingered in the still mountain air. And for the first time in many years, Hiro began to wonder whether he had come seeking answers, or whether he had come carrying too many of his own. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. Along a quiet coastline where the mountains met the sea, there was a small fishing village known for its simplicity. The houses were built from weathered wood. Fishing boats lined the shore. At dawn, the villagers launched their vessels into the water. At dusk, they returned with their catch. Life followed the rhythm of the sea. The tides came and went. The seasons changed. Storms arrived and departed. The people understood that some things could be guided, but never controlled. At least, most of them understood. One fisherman did not. His name was Haru. Haru was hard-working, intelligent, and ambitious. But he carried a habit that quietly robbed him of peace. He wanted everything to happen according to his plans. If the weather changed unexpectedly, he became frustrated. If the fish were scarce, he became anxious. If another fisherman caught more than he did, he became resentful. Whenever life moved in a direction he had not chosen, he suffered. To Haru, success meant control. The more control he possessed, the safer he felt, or so he believed. Each morning before sailing, he checked the sky obsessively. He studied the clouds. He watched the waves. He listened for changes in the wind. Yet no amount of preparation seemed enough. The sea always found new ways to surprise him. One day brought calm water and empty nets. Another brought rough water and an unexpected abundance of fish. The patterns refused to obey logic. The unpredictability tormented him. Meanwhile, an older fisherman named Kenji seemed strangely content. Kenji's boat was smaller. His nets were older. His catches were often modest. Yet he smiled more than anyone in the village. He greeted every sunrise with gratitude. He accepted every storm without complaint. Even when things went wrong, he remained calm. This puzzled Haru. One afternoon, after a particularly disappointing day at sea, Haru approached him. "I don't understand you." Kenji laughed. "Many people say that." The two sat on a weathered dock overlooking the harbor. Fishing boats rocked gently in the water. Seagulls circled overhead. "What don't you understand?" asked Kenji. "You never seem worried." The old fisherman smiled. "Oh, I worry sometimes." "Then why don't you look worried?" Kenji gazed toward the horizon. "Because worry and reality are rarely the same thing." Haru frowned. The answer felt incomplete, as many of Kenji's answers often did. Several weeks later, an unusual event occurred. A wealthy merchant arrived in the village carrying an invention he claimed would change fishing forever. The merchant gathered everyone in the square. The villagers listened curiously. The merchant stood proudly beside a strange mechanical device mounted on wheels. "What is it?" someone asked. The merchant grinned. "A wind catcher." The villagers exchanged confused glances. The merchant continued. "With this machine, you can direct the wind wherever you want it to go." The crowd murmured. "If you control the wind, you control the sea." Many villagers seemed skeptical. Haru did not. The idea fascinated him. Imagine it. No unexpected weather, no unfavorable conditions, no surprises. Complete control. The merchant demonstrated the machine. It spun. It rattled. It made impressive noises. Several villagers remained unconvinced. Haru was not among them. Without hesitation, he purchased it. The machine cost nearly all his savings, but he considered it an investment in certainty. The next morning, he attached the device to his boat. As he sailed away from shore, villagers watched curiously. Kenji simply smiled. At first, everything seemed promising. The machine whirred loudly. Its sails turned. Its gears clicked. Haru felt powerful, confident, in control. Whenever the wind shifted, he adjusted the machine. Whenever conditions changed, he attempted to compensate. Yet something strange happened. The harder he worked to control everything, the more exhausted he became. Instead of focusing on fishing, he spent his time adjusting mechanisms. Instead of observing the sea, he obsessed over measurements. Instead of enjoying the journey, he constantly fought reality. Several hours later, he realized he had barely caught any fish. Most of his attention had been devoted to controlling the uncontrollable. Still, he refused to give up. Days became weeks. The machine grew increasingly complicated. Haru made modifications, added components, adjusted settings, studied manuals. The more problems he encountered, the more determined he became. Yet peace never arrived. Neither did certainty. Life continued changing. The sea continued surprising him. The wind continued doing whatever it pleased. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day, a storm arrived unexpectedly. Dark clouds gathered rapidly. The waves grew rough. Strong winds swept across the water. Haru immediately activated every feature of the machine. Levers moved, wheels spun, ropes tightened. The device rattled furiously. For a few moments, it seemed to help. Then the wind shifted, then shifted again, then shifted once more. Soon the machine was fighting forces far beyond its design. Metal groaned, wood cracked, gears jammed. A loud snap echoed across the deck. The entire device collapsed. Pieces scattered across the boat. Haru stared in disbelief. Months of effort destroyed within moments. The storm continued regardless. The wind seemed completely indifferent to his plans. For the first time, Haru stopped trying to control it. He simply focused on steering safely, on adjusting his sails, on responding wisely to changing conditions. Hours later, he returned to shore, exhausted, soaked, silent. The next morning, villagers gathered to inspect the wreckage. Most offered sympathy, some offered advice. Kenji offered tea. The two fishermen sat overlooking the sea. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, Haru broke the silence. "I failed." Kenji looked at the broken machine. "Perhaps. I wanted certainty." The old fisherman nodded. "Most people do. I wanted control. Most people want that too." Haru stared at the waves. "But the wind doesn't listen." Kenji smiled. "No." The old fisherman picked up a small shell from the dock. Then he said something Haru never forgot. "The wise sailor does not control the wind." He paused. "He learns how to work with it." The words lingered. The harbor remained quiet. Waves lapped gently against wooden posts. Somewhere nearby, a gull cried out. Haru thought about all the years he had spent fighting reality, fighting uncertainty, fighting change, fighting things that were never his to control. And suddenly, he felt very tired, not physically, spiritually, as though he had been swimming against a current for years. Over the following months, Haru gradually changed, not overnight, slowly, like the turning of seasons. He stopped obsessing over perfect conditions. He stopped demanding guarantees from life. He stopped expecting certainty before taking action. Instead, he focused on what he could actually influence: his effort, his attention, his attitude, his choices. The weather remained unpredictable. The sea remained unpredictable. Life remained unpredictable. Yet his suffering decreased. One morning, years later, a young fisherman approached him. The young man looked worried. "The forecast says the wind may change." Haru smiled. "It probably will. But what if conditions become difficult?" The older fisherman gazed toward the horizon. The sea sparkled beneath the morning sun. Then he answered, "They probably will." The young fisherman looked confused. "Then how can you be so calm?" Haru laughed softly. Because once, long ago, he would have asked exactly the same question. He pointed toward the sails of a nearby boat. Do you see those? Yes. The sailor cannot command the wind. No. But he can adjust the sails. The young man remained silent. Haru continued. Most people spend their lives trying to command the wind. The wise learn to adjust their sails. Many years passed. Haru grew old. His hair turned silver. His hands became weathered from decades at sea. One evening, as the sun sank into the ocean, he sat alone at the end of the dock. The sky glowed orange and gold. A gentle breeze moved across the water. He closed his eyes and listened. The wind felt different now, not because it had changed, but because his relationship to it had changed. For years he had treated life as an opponent, something to conquer, something to control, something to force into obedience. Yet life had never been the enemy. It had simply been life, like the sea, like the weather, like the wind, forever changing, forever moving, forever impossible to hold. And perhaps that was the lesson. Much of human suffering comes from trying to control what cannot be controlled. We try to command the future. We try to prevent change. We try to eliminate uncertainty. We try to force life to follow our plans. But chasing control is often like chasing the wind. The harder we run after it, the farther it seems to move away. Peace arrives differently, not when the wind obeys us, but when we learn to move with it, to respond rather than resist, to adapt rather than fight, to trust rather than cling. The wind still blows, the sea still changes, the future remains uncertain. Yet the wise sailor smiles, not because he controls the wind, but because he has finally learned he never needed to. And as the evening breeze moved gently across the harbour, Haru smiled too. For at last, after many years of chasing the wind, he had learned how to sail. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. Long ago, at the edge of a dense forest, where the hills rolled gently toward the sea, there stood a small village known for its traders and craftsmen. The village was peaceful. Children played in the dusty streets. Farmers worked the surrounding fields. Fishermen launched their boats each morning before sunrise. Life moved at a familiar rhythm. People knew one another. Families had lived there for generations. Yet despite the village's peaceful reputation, there was one thing the people feared: the forest. Not because it was dangerous, not because wild animals roamed its depths, not because travelers regularly disappeared. The fear came from stories passed from parent to child, stories whispered around evening fires, stories repeated so often that nobody questioned them anymore. People said strange things lived beneath the trees. They spoke of spirits, hidden dangers, unseen threats. Few villagers entered the forest after sunset. Most avoided it entirely at night. Among the villagers lived a young man named Kiran. Unlike many others, Kiran considered himself practical. He did not believe every story he heard. He trusted evidence, logic, reason. At least, that was what he told himself. Yet like most people, he carried fears he did not fully understand. Some fears came from childhood, others came from painful experiences. Still others seemed to arise without explanation. Whenever uncertainty appeared, his imagination quickly filled the gaps, often with unpleasant possibilities. One autumn evening, Kiran finished work later than usual. The sun had already disappeared behind the hills. Twilight spread across the landscape. The quickest route home passed through a section of forest. Normally he would avoid it after dark, but he was tired. The longer road felt inconvenient, so he decided to take the shortcut. At first, everything seemed fine. The path remained visible. The air was cool and pleasant. Crickets sang among the trees. The last traces of daylight filtered through the branches overhead. Then the forest grew darker. Shadows stretched across the ground. The path became harder to see. The sounds of the village faded behind him. Soon he found himself alone beneath the trees. The silence felt heavier now. Every snapping twig caught his attention. Every rustling leaf seemed suspicious. His pace quickened. Then it happened. A few steps ahead, partially hidden in the darkness, he saw something lying across the path, long, curved, motionless. His heart immediately began racing. A snake, a large one. The shape seemed unmistakable. Kiran froze. The forest suddenly felt very different. His mouth became dry, his breathing shallow. Countless thoughts rushed through his mind. What if it's venomous? What if it attacks? What if I can't get away? The snake remained still, watching, waiting, or so it seemed. Several minutes passed. Neither Kiran nor the snake moved. Fear held him in place. Eventually, he stepped backward. Then another step. Then another. Without taking his eyes from the shape, he retreated along the path. When he finally reached the village, he immediately began warning others. There's a huge snake in the forest. The news spread quickly. People became concerned. Some avoided the area entirely. Others shared additional stories. Perhaps it was the same snake seen years ago. Perhaps it had a nest nearby. Perhaps it had already bitten someone. The rumors grew larger with each retelling. By morning, the snake seemed enormous. By afternoon, it had become legendary. That evening, an elderly monk named Venerable Soma arrived in the village. He was traveling between monasteries and planned to stay only a few days. Naturally, someone told him about the snake. The old monk listened carefully. Then he asked, "Has anyone actually seen it in daylight?" The villagers exchanged glances. No one had. The monk smiled. Interesting. The following morning, before sunrise, Soma walked toward the forest. Several villagers followed, including Kiran. Curiosity overcame fear. Together they reached the section of path where the snake had supposedly appeared. The old monk stopped. Then he pointed toward the ground. "What do you see?" Kiran stared. His face flushed immediately. There was no snake, only an old rope, weathered, dusty, partially coiled, exactly where he had seen the snake. The shape was identical. Yet now, in daylight, the truth seemed obvious. The villagers laughed. Some laughed gently, others laughed loudly. Kiran felt embarrassed, very embarrassed. He wanted to disappear, but Venerable Soma did not laugh. Instead, he sat beside the rope. For a moment, he simply observed it. Then he asked, "When you saw this last night, were you afraid?" "Very." "Did your fear feel real?" "Yes." "Did your heart race?" "Yes." "Did your body react?" "Yes." The monk nodded. Then he touched the rope. The snake was never real. He paused. But the suffering was. The villagers fell silent. The lesson was not over. They could all feel it. Soma continued. "This is how much of human suffering operates." He lifted the rope gently. "We see something unclear. Our minds become uncertain, and uncertainty makes us uncomfortable." The monk looked around at the gathered crowd. "So we create a story." The villagers listened carefully. The old monk smiled. "The story feels real. Our bodies react. Our emotions react. Our lives begin reacting. Yet often the suffering comes not from reality itself. He held up the rope, but from what we imagine reality to be. The words lingered, especially for Kieran, because he knew exactly what the monk meant. The rope had not frightened him. His interpretation had. Over the following days, he found himself thinking about the incident constantly. At first, he laughed at himself. Then gradually, he noticed something surprising. The rope and snake lesson appeared everywhere. One morning, a friend failed to greet him. Immediately, Kieran assumed the man was angry. For several hours, he worried about it. Eventually, he asked. The friend laughed. "I didn't see you." The snake became a rope. A week later, a merchant delayed a payment. Kieran imagined deception, dishonesty, bad intentions. Several anxious days followed. Then the merchant arrived apologetically. A bridge had been damaged by flooding. Nothing more. Another snake became a rope. The pattern repeated again and again. The more he paid attention, the more he noticed how often his mind rushed ahead of reality, filling empty spaces with assumptions, predictions, fears, stories. One afternoon, he sought out Venerable Soma. The monk sat beneath a banyan tree overlooking the fields. Kieran bowed respectfully. "Master, why does the mind do this?" The old monk smiled. "Because it wants certainty." The young man frowned. "But certainty doesn't exist." "Exactly." The monk nodded. "And the mind dislikes that." For a while, neither spoke. The wind moved softly through the leaves. Finally, Soma continued. "The mind often believes uncertainty is dangerous, so it rushes to create conclusions. Even incorrect conclusions feel safer than not knowing." Kieran considered this carefully. The explanation felt uncomfortably accurate. The old monk picked up a leaf. Then he said, "The problem is not thinking. The problem is believing every thought." Years passed. The lesson continued deepening. Kieran became more patient with uncertainty. Not perfect, but better. Whenever fear appeared, he learned to ask, "Am I seeing a snake or a rope?" The question saved him from countless misunderstandings. It prevented arguments, reduced anxiety, created space for wisdom. Eventually, he became known throughout the village as a thoughtful man. People often sought his advice. One evening, a young woman arrived in distress. "My son is late returning home." Kieran listened carefully. He has never been this late. Her imagination had already produced dozens of frightening possibilities: accidents, injuries, disasters. Kieran nodded. Then he asked gently, "How much do you know?" The woman paused. "Very little." "And how much are you imagining?" Tears filled her eyes. "A lot." The older man smiled kindly. "Then perhaps we should wait for daylight." Several hours later, her son returned safely. His cart had broken a wheel. Nothing more. Another rope. Many years later, Kieran himself grew old. His hair turned white. His movements slowed. Yet he never forgot the lesson of the forest. One evening, shortly before sunset, he walked the same path where he had once mistaken the rope for a snake. The forest looked much as it always had. The trees remained. The shadows remained. The uncertainty remained. Only he had changed. As twilight settled across the path, he noticed an object lying ahead. Long, curved, partially hidden in darkness. For a brief moment, the old fear stirred. Then he smiled. Not because he knew what the object was, but because he no longer needed to know immediately. Slowly, he walked closer. Step by step, the object came into view. Another rope. Kieran laughed softly. The sound echoed among the trees. And perhaps that was the deepest lesson of all. Wisdom is not seeing only ropes. Wisdom is recognizing when we do not yet know. Most suffering begins when we mistake imagination for reality, when assumptions become facts, when fears become certainty, when stories become truth. The Buddha often taught that clarity begins with seeing things as they are, not as we fear they are, not as we wish they were, not as we imagine they might become, but as they actually are. This sounds simple, yet it may be one of the most difficult practices in life. For the mind loves stories, it loves predictions, it loves conclusions. And many of those conclusions arrive long before understanding. The rope remains a powerful teacher, because it reminds us that fear can feel completely real, even when its object is not. The suffering is real, the racing heart is real, the anxiety is real, yet sometimes the snake exists only in the mind. So the next time fear appears, pause, breathe, look carefully, move closer if you can. Allow reality to reveal itself. You may still discover a snake. Life certainly contains real dangers, but you may also discover a rope. And if you do, you may find that the thing frightening you was never there at all. Only a shadow, a story, a misunderstanding waiting for daylight. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. The village sat between rolling hills and wide grasslands where wild horses often wandered freely. Most of the villagers made their living through farming. Life followed the seasons, planting in spring, growing in summer, harvesting in autumn, resting in winter. The people worked hard and worried often. Rain might come too late, frost might arrive too early, animals might become sick, markets might change. The future always seemed uncertain. Among the villagers lived an elderly farmer named Ren. Ren was not rich, nor was he poor. He owned a small house, a few fields, and one beautiful horse. The horse was strong, healthy, and admired throughout the valley. Travelers often commented on its beauty. Neighbors frequently offered to buy it. Ren always declined. The horse had been with him for many years. More importantly, it helped him work the land. One autumn morning, the horse disappeared. The gate to its enclosure had somehow opened during the night. The animal was gone. The villagers quickly heard the news. Several neighbors came to visit. They found Ren repairing a fence. When he saw them approaching, he smiled and waved. The visitors looked surprised. One of them finally said, "Ren, we heard about your horse." "Yes, what terrible luck." The farmer continued hammering a wooden post. Then he shrugged. "Maybe." The neighbors exchanged confused glances. Maybe. The horse was gone. Surely this was bad luck. Yet Ren appeared strangely calm. The villagers returned home shaking their heads. The old farmer had always been a little unusual. Several days passed. Then something unexpected happened. The horse returned. Not alone. Following behind it were 3 wild horses from the hills. Beautiful animals. Strong. Healthy. Suddenly, Ren owned 4 horses instead of 1. The village buzzed with excitement. People hurried to congratulate him. "What amazing luck!" one neighbor exclaimed. "Your horse brought back 3 more." Another laughed. "You are richer than ever." The villagers expected Ren to celebrate. Instead, he simply nodded. Maybe. Again, the same answer. Again, the same calm expression. The neighbors found this increasingly frustrating. How could anyone respond this way? The outcome was clearly positive. Surely everyone could see that. Yet Ren remained unchanged. Several weeks later, Ren's son attempted to train one of the wild horses. The animal had not yet become accustomed to people. During the training, it bucked violently. The young man was thrown to the ground. His leg broke badly. The injury would take months to heal. Again, villagers gathered. Again, sympathy flowed freely. What terrible luck. Your poor son. This is exactly why wild horses are dangerous. Ren listened politely. Then he answered, maybe. The neighbors nearly groaned aloud. How could he still say maybe? His son was injured. The situation was obviously unfortunate. Yet the old farmer refused to label it. Winter arrived. Snow covered the valley. The son remained unable to work. Then news came from the capital. The kingdom had entered a conflict with a neighboring nation. Soldiers traveled through villages recruiting every able-bodied young man. Families worried. Many cried. The army demanded service immediately. When the recruiters arrived in Ren's village, they took nearly every healthy young man, except one, Ren's son. His broken leg prevented him from serving. The soldiers left without him. Once again, the villagers gathered. This time their expressions looked very different. What incredible luck. His injury saved him. Who knows what might happen in the war? The people spoke excitedly. The outcome now seemed obvious. Yet Ren simply smiled. Maybe. At this point, many villagers stopped trying to understand him. His answers seemed impossible. Events were either good or bad, fortunate or unfortunate, lucky or unlucky. Everyone knew this. Everyone except Ren. Years passed. The war ended. Some young men returned home. Others did not. Life slowly resumed its familiar rhythm. Yet the story of Ren and his horse remained. People continued discussing it, especially when unexpected events occurred. One spring, a young woman named Emmy decided to visit the farmer. She had recently experienced several difficulties. Her business had failed. A close friendship had ended. Plans she spent years building had collapsed. The future felt uncertain. She desperately wanted answers. When she arrived, she found Ren sitting beneath a tree repairing farm tools. The old farmer welcomed her warmly. After sharing tea, Emmy finally explained her troubles. For nearly an hour she spoke. The failed business, the broken friendship, the disappointment, the fear, the uncertainty. When she finished, Ren nodded thoughtfully. Then he asked, "And what will happen next?" The question surprised her. "I don't know." The old farmer smiled. "Neither do I." Emmy frowned. "That's not helpful." Ren laughed softly. "No? No." The young woman crossed her arms. "Everything is falling apart." The farmer considered this. Then he asked, "Is it?" She stared at him. "What else would you call it?" Instead of answering, Ren stood. He motioned for her to follow. Together they walked through the fields. Eventually they reached a patch of land recently plowed for planting. The earth looked rough, broken, uneven, nothing beautiful about it. The farmer pointed toward the soil. "What do you see?" "Dirt." "What else?" "A field." The old man nodded. "Does it look healthy?" Emmy shrugged. "I suppose." Ren smiled. Several weeks ago, this field looked completely different. He knelt and picked up a handful of soil. The ground had to be broken before seeds could be planted. The young woman remained silent. The farmer continued. From the perspective of the soil, the plow might seem like destruction. He let the dirt fall slowly from his fingers. But from another perspective, it is preparation. The words lingered, not because they solved her problems, because they challenged her assumptions. For years, Emmy had divided life into categories: success and failure, gain and loss, good and bad. Yet reality seemed less certain than that. Several months later, she returned, this time with a different question. How do you stay calm when things go wrong? Ren laughed. I don't always. The answer surprised her. You don't? Of course not. The farmer smiled. I feel disappointment. I feel sadness. I feel frustration. The wind moved softly through the fields around them. But I try not to pretend I know the final outcome. Emmy listened carefully. The old man continued. Most people suffer twice. The statement caught her attention. What do you mean? The first suffering comes from the event itself. The farmer pointed toward the distant hills. The second comes from immediately deciding what the event means. He looked at her kindly. When the horse left, everyone declared it bad. When it returned with 3 horses, everyone declared it good. When the leg broke, everyone declared it bad. When the army arrived, everyone declared it good. The old man smiled. The story kept changing. The lesson slowly settled inside her. Months passed. Emmy began practicing this perspective, not perfectly, not consistently, but sincerely. Whenever difficulties arose, she tried pausing before labeling them. Whenever success arrived, she resisted assuming it would last forever. The practice felt strange, yet surprisingly freeing. 1 year later, an opportunity appeared through a former business contact. Had her original business succeeded, she would never have noticed it. The new opportunity proved far more fulfilling. Suddenly, what once looked like failure appeared differently. Not better, not worse, simply part of a larger story. Years continued flowing by. Ren grew older, his hair whitened, his movements slowed, yet people continued seeking his advice. One day, a merchant arrived in great distress. A shipment of goods had been lost. The man was furious, panicked, convinced his future was ruined. After listening patiently, Ren asked, "What happens next?" The merchant sighed. "I don't know." The farmer smiled. "Then perhaps the story is not finished." Another time, a young couple arrived, celebrating an unexpected inheritance. They spoke excitedly about their good fortune. When they finally paused, Ren asked, "What happens next?" The couple looked puzzled. "We don't know." The farmer nodded. "Exactly. The same lesson, again and again. Not pessimism, not optimism, openness." Years later, after Ren had passed away, people still told his story. The horse, the wild horses, the broken leg, the war. Children learned it, parents repeated it, travelers carried it to distant villages, because everyone recognized themselves within it. Everyone knew what it felt like to declare an event good or bad immediately. Everyone knew what it felt like to discover later that they were mistaken. A lost opportunity becomes a blessing. A great success creates unexpected problems. A painful ending opens a new beginning. A joyful beginning becomes difficult. Life rarely follows straight lines. The Buddha often taught about uncertainty, not as something to fear, but as something to understand. Much of suffering arises from our insistence that we already know how events should unfold. We cling to preferred outcomes, resist unwanted ones. Then reality surprises us, again and again. The farmer understood something simple but profound. Very few moments reveal their full meaning immediately. The story continues. The river keeps flowing. The seasons keep changing. What looks like an ending may become a beginning. What appears fortunate may carry hidden challenges. What appears unfortunate may contain hidden gifts. Wisdom does not require predicting the future. It requires humility before it. So when life brings success, enjoy it. When life brings disappointment, feel it. But perhaps leave a little space around your conclusions. Perhaps allow room for mystery. Perhaps remember the farmer and his horse. And perhaps remember one small word, maybe. Not because nothing matters, but because the story is rarely finished when we think it is. And some of life's deepest lessons reveal themselves only after many pages have turned. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. In the center of a great plain stood an ancient banyan tree. The tree was so enormous that travelers used it as a landmark. Its branches spread outward like rivers flowing through the sky. Its roots descended from the limbs and entered the earth again, creating natural archways and shaded corridors beneath the canopy. Entire families could sit beneath it without touching one another. Birds nested in its branches. Monkeys played among its leaves. Travelers rested in its shade. Merchants stopped their carts beside it. Children climbed its roots. For generations, the banyan tree had become part of the landscape itself. People spoke of it the way they spoke of mountains: permanent, ancient, important. Far less attention was given to a tiny sparrow who lived among the upper branches. Her name, if birds can be said to have names, was Cheery. Compared to the banyan tree, she seemed insignificant. She weighed almost nothing. Her nest was small. Her voice was soft. Most creatures living beneath the tree never noticed her. Had someone asked whether a sparrow could change the world, nearly everyone would have laughed. What influence could such a tiny bird possibly possess? The banyan tree itself seemed to hold more significance than thousands of sparrows. Yet life often hides its deepest lessons inside the smallest things. One summer brought unusual heat. Weeks passed without rain. The streams shrank. Ponds became shallow. The grass turned yellow. Animals grew restless. Farmers watched the skies anxiously. Everyone hoped for clouds. None appeared. As the drought continued, many creatures left the region. Birds migrated elsewhere. Deer traveled deeper into the forest. Even insects became harder to find. The great banyan tree endured better than most. Its roots reached deep underground. It remained green while smaller plants withered. Yet even the banyan began showing signs of stress. Leaves fell earlier than normal. Branches drooped slightly. Life became harder for everyone, including Cheery. Each day, she flew farther in search of food. Each day, she returned more tired. One evening, while searching for seeds, she discovered something unusual. Near the edge of a dried streambed stood a small patch of green plants. Most vegetation had already turned brown. These plants remained alive. Curious, she landed nearby. The soil felt damp, not wet, but damp. Somehow moisture still existed beneath the surface. The sparrow ate several seeds and returned home. The next day, she visited again, then again. Soon the place became part of her daily routine. Unknowingly, she carried seeds away from the patch. Some remained trapped in her feathers. Others fell from her beak during flight. Still others passed naturally through her digestive system. The process seemed entirely unimportant. After all, she was only a sparrow, and they were only seeds. Several weeks later, the drought finally ended. Rain returned. The earth drank deeply. Streams filled again. The valley slowly recovered. Life resumed its familiar rhythm. Most creatures quickly forgot about the drought. The banyan tree certainly did. The following spring, something unexpected happened. Small plants began appearing throughout the valley, not unusual by itself, but these particular plants were different. They belonged to the same species Chiri had discovered beside the stream bed. They grew rapidly, produced abundant seeds, and proved remarkably resistant to dry conditions. The plants spread steadily, year after year. Their roots helped stabilize soil. Their seeds provided food for birds. Their flowers attracted pollinators. Farmers noticed improved conditions in several areas where the plants became established. No one understood how they had spread so widely. Certainly no one credited a sparrow. The years passed. The valley prospered. Life continued, and Chiri remained entirely unaware of her role. One autumn morning, a young monk arrived beneath the banyan tree. His name was Tenzin. He had recently entered monastic life and struggled with feelings of inadequacy. The monastery contained many gifted individuals. Some were brilliant teachers. Others excelled at meditation. Others cared for the sick. Others managed the gardens. Compared to them, Tenzin felt ordinary. Whatever task he performed seemed small, insignificant, replaceable. The feeling troubled him. One afternoon, after voicing these concerns to an elderly monk, he received unusual advice. Go sit beneath the banyan tree. That was all. No explanation, no lecture, just an instruction. The young monk obeyed. For several days, he sat beneath the enormous tree. At first, nothing happened. The tree stood. Birds sang. The wind moved through the branches. The experience seemed uneventful. Then, on the third day, he noticed a sparrow carrying tiny twigs. Back and forth, building a nest. The work appeared endless. The twigs seemed ridiculously small compared to the massive tree. Yet the bird continued, hour after hour, day after day. Eventually, a nest appeared. Small, simple, functional. The sight lingered in Tenzin's mind. Later that week, he mentioned it to the elderly monk. The old man smiled. What did you learn? The younger monk shrugged. A sparrow built a nest. The elder laughed softly. Yes. And? Tenzin frowned. The old monk waited. Finally, the younger man said, It built the nest one twig at a time. The elder nodded. Exactly. The lesson felt simple, perhaps too simple, yet over time, it deepened. Several months later, a severe storm struck the valley. Wind tore branches from trees. Rain flooded paths. The monastery suffered considerable damage. Afterward, everyone worked together to repair buildings. The task seemed overwhelming. Broken roofs, collapsed fences, damaged gardens. For a moment, Tenzin felt discouraged. The work looked impossible. Then he remembered the sparrow. One twig at a time. The repairs proceeded the same way. One board, one nail, one stone, 1 hour, 1 day. Gradually, the monastery recovered. The lesson became clearer. Great achievements rarely occur through single dramatic actions. They emerge through countless small ones. Years passed. Tenzin continued practicing, meditating, working, learning. Whenever a task appeared overwhelming, he remembered the sparrow. Whenever progress felt invisible, he remembered the nest. One twig at a time, one breath at a time, 1 day at a time. Then another challenge arrived. An epidemic spread through nearby villages. Many families became ill. The monastery organized relief efforts. Food needed transporting. Medicine needed distributing. The suffering felt immense. The need seemed endless. Several younger monks became discouraged. What difference can we make? One asked. There are too many people. The problem appeared too large, the resources too limited. Tenzin understood the feeling, yet he also remembered the banyan tree, the sparrow, the seeds. although he did not know that story yet, only the lesson. So he answered, "We help the next person." The monks continued working, one family, then another, then another. Weeks later, villagers began recovering. The crisis gradually passed, not because one heroic action solved everything, because many small actions accumulated. Years flowed onward. Tenzin eventually became responsible for teaching novices. One afternoon, a frustrated student approached him. "I am not accomplishing anything." The novice looked miserable. "My meditation is improving too slowly. My studies are improving too slowly. Everything is too slow." Tenzin smiled, then led the young monk to the banyan tree. The ancient giant still stood proudly in the center of the plain. Birds moved among its branches. Roots descended toward the earth. The tree seemed eternal. "How long do you think this tree took to grow?" Tenzin asked. The novice looked upward. "A very long time." "Would you plant a seed and demand a tree tomorrow?" "Of course not." The teacher nodded. "Then why demand it from yourself?" The novice fell silent, because the question revealed something obvious, yet easily forgotten. Years later, a wandering naturalist visited the region. The man studied plants, animals, and ecosystems. While exploring the valley, he became fascinated by the drought-resistant plants growing everywhere. Their distribution puzzled him. Eventually, he traced their origin back to the tiny patch near the dried stream bed. The mystery remained. How had the plants spread so widely? The naturalist spent months investigating. Finally, he reached a surprising conclusion. Birds, particularly sparrows. For years they had carried seeds across the valley. Small actions, repeated countless times. The result transformed entire ecosystems. The naturalist shared his findings with villagers. Many found the story amusing. Others found it inspiring. A few found it profound. Tenzin belonged to the final group. When he heard the story, he immediately thought of the sparrow, the nest, the monastery repairs, the relief efforts, the countless moments when small actions appeared insignificant. The realization struck deeply. The sparrow never intended to transform the valley. It simply did what it could. One seed, one flight, one day, and somehow those actions accumulated into something far greater. The lesson continued shaping Tenzin's life. As he aged, he became known for encouraging patience and consistency. Not grand gestures, not dramatic transformations, steady effort, compassionate action, small beginnings. One spring, a wealthy merchant visited the monastery. The man wanted to donate money, a great deal of money, but only if his contribution would create something spectacular, something memorable, something people would admire. After listening politely, Tenzin asked, "Have you ever watched a sparrow build a nest?" The merchant looked confused. "What does that have to do with charity?" The old monk smiled. "Everything." The merchant stayed several days. Eventually, he understood. The most meaningful contributions often arrive quietly, not through applause, not through recognition, through consistent acts of care. Late in life, Tenzin spent many afternoons sitting beneath the banyan tree. The ancient giant had grown even larger. New roots touched the earth. New birds nested among its branches. Generations of sparrows had come and gone. The valley continued changing. Yet the lessons remained. One evening, a child sat beside him. The boy pointed toward a sparrow carrying a tiny seed. "What difference can one seed make?" Tenzin smiled. A beautiful question. The same question many adults ask in different forms. What difference can one act of kindness make? One conversation, one moment of patience, one generous gesture, one person. The old monk looked toward the horizon, then back at the bird. More than you think. The child waited. Tenzin continued. The sparrow doesn't know where every seed will land. It doesn't know which ones will grow. It doesn't know what those plants might become. The wind moved softly through the banyan leaves. But it carries the seed anyway. The child nodded slowly. Years later, that lesson would return when he needed it most, as all good lessons do. And perhaps that is the lesson. Many people underestimate the power of small actions. They believe change must be dramatic to matter, visible to matter, immediate to matter. Yet life rarely works that way. Forests begin as seeds. Friendships begin as conversations. Wisdom begins as attention. Compassion begins as a single choice. The Buddha often taught that great transformations arise from causes and conditions accumulating over time. Not through magic, not through sudden miracles, through countless small actions shaping one another. The sparrow never looked important. The seed never looked important. The daily flights never looked important. Yet together, they transformed an entire valley. So when your actions seem small, remember the sparrow. When progress feels invisible, remember the nest. When the task appears overwhelming, remember the seed. You do not need to change the whole world today. You do not need to solve every problem. You do not need to see the final outcome. Carry the seed. Place the twig. Take the next step. Offer the kindness. Speak the encouragement. Plant the beginning. The results may remain invisible for a long time, but life has a remarkable way of multiplying sincere efforts. Just as one tiny sparrow helped reshape an entire valley without ever realizing it, our smallest actions often travel farther than we can see. And sometimes, long after we are gone, the seeds continue growing. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. There once stood a monastery on a rocky hill overlooking a valley of farms, rivers, and scattered villages. The monastery was not famous. Kings did not visit. Great scholars rarely traveled there. It possessed no treasures, no magnificent statues, no golden halls. Yet travelers often spoke about one unusual thing. Every evening, as darkness settled across the valley, a single candle burned in the main meditation hall. The candle was small, ordinary, almost unremarkable. Yet it had become a symbol throughout the region. People called it the ever-giving flame, not because it burned forever, because it seemed to teach a lesson no one forgot. Among the young novices living at the monastery was a boy named Kenji. Kenji was intelligent, curious, hard-working, but he struggled with generosity. Not because he was selfish, at least not intentionally. He simply feared losing what he had. When food was shared, he worried there might not be enough. When possessions were borrowed, he worried they would not return. When time was requested, he worried he would fall behind in his own work. His fear was quiet, subtle, but powerful. Whenever opportunities to give appeared, a voice inside him whispered, "What if you need it later? What if there isn't enough? What if giving leaves you with less?" The voice rarely shouted. It didn't need to. It spoke softly, persistently, like water dripping onto stone. One evening, while helping prepare the meditation hall, Kenji noticed the old abbot lighting the central candle. The flame flickered gently. The hall glowed with warm light. Several smaller candles sat nearby. One by one, the abbot used the main candle to light them. Soon, dozens of flames illuminated the room. The sight was beautiful. Yet something puzzled the young novice. After the ceremony, he approached the abbot. "Master?" The old monk smiled. "Yes?" Kenji pointed toward the candles. "Why do we always light them this way?" The abbot looked thoughtful. "Which way?" "Using one candle to light all the others." The old monk smiled. "Watch carefully tomorrow." The answer felt unsatisfying. Yet Kenji had learned that the abbot rarely explained things immediately. The following evening, the novice arrived early. He watched closely. Again, the central candle was lit first. Then it ignited another candle, then another, then another. Soon, the hall glowed with dozens of flames. When the ceremony ended, the abbot approached. "What did you notice?" Kenji frowned. "The same thing as yesterday." The old monk nodded. "And the first candle? What about it? Did it lose its flame?" The novice blinked. "No." The abbot smiled. "It shared light, without becoming darker." The lesson seemed simple, perhaps too simple. Kenji nodded politely. Yet he sensed the old monk was pointing towards something deeper. Several weeks later, an opportunity arrived. A severe storm struck a neighboring village. Several homes were damaged. Food supplies were ruined. Many families struggled. The monastery organized relief efforts. Monks gathered rice, medicine, blankets, tools. Everyone contributed what they could, including the novices. When Kenji looked at his small storage chest, uncertainty appeared immediately. He possessed only a few things: a warm blanket, some saved food, a spare robe. Nothing excessive, nothing luxurious. If he gave away part of it, he would have less. The familiar voice returned. "What if you need it later?" The fear felt reasonable, practical, responsible. Yet something about it bothered him. That evening, he sat alone in the meditation hall. The candles flickered softly. Eventually, the abbot entered. Without looking up, the old monk asked, "What troubles you?" Kenji sighed. "I want to help." The monk nodded. "But?" The novice hesitated. "What if I need what I give away?" The old monk sat beside him. For several moments they watched the flames. Then the abbot pointed toward the central candle. "How many candles did it light tonight?" "Dozens." "And how much light did it lose?" Kenji smiled slightly. "None." The old monk nodded. "Interesting." The answer irritated him, because it seemed too simple for a complicated problem. The abbot noticed, then asked, "What do you think generosity means?" Kenji considered carefully. "Giving things away." The old monk smiled. "Partly." "Then what else?" The answer came softly. "Trust." The next morning, Kenji donated part of his supplies. Not everything, not dramatically, just enough to matter. The act felt uncomfortable. For several days, he worried. What if he needed those things later? What if he made a mistake? Nothing terrible happened. Life continued. The world did not collapse. In fact, something unexpected occurred. The act of giving felt lighter than the fear of giving. The realization surprised him. Months passed. The lesson continued unfolding. One afternoon, a new novice arrived at the monastery. The boy struggled with reading. While other students advanced quickly, he fell behind. Embarrassment isolated him. Eventually, the teachers asked Kenji to help. The request created another conflict. Teaching required time that could be spent studying, practicing, improving himself. Again, The familiar voice appeared. What if helping slows your own progress? Yet he remembered the candle, so he agreed. For several months, he spent extra hours helping the younger novice learn. The process required patience, repeated explanations, countless mistakes, gradual improvement. Eventually, the boy succeeded. The joy on his face felt genuine. Unexpectedly, Kenji discovered something else. Teaching strengthened his own understanding. Knowledge, like flame, seemed capable of spreading without diminishing, perhaps even growing. Years passed. The novice became a monk, then a teacher. The lesson followed him everywhere. One spring, a wealthy merchant visited the monastery. The man donated a large sum of money, then announced the gift publicly, several times, to many people. After he departed, a young student asked, "Was that generosity?" The question sparked discussion. Many monks offered opinions. Eventually, they turned toward Kenji. By now, he had become known for wisdom. The older monk considered carefully, then answered, "The gift was real." The student nodded. But Kenji smiled. Generosity becomes lighter when it seeks no reward. The lesson lingered, like candlelight, soft, quiet, persistent. One summer, famine struck part of the region. The situation became severe. Many families lacked food. The monastery opened its storehouses. Rice reserves diminished quickly. Several younger monks became worried. If we continue giving, we may not have enough for winter. The concern felt legitimate. The numbers supported it. The risk was real. The monks gathered to discuss the situation. Opinions differed. Some favored caution. Others favored continued generosity. Eventually, everyone looked toward Kenji. The old monk sat quietly for several moments. Then he asked, "Do you remember the candle?" Several monks smiled. The story had become famous. Kenji continued, "The candle does not calculate how much darkness remains before sharing its light." Silence filled the room. The lesson felt uncomfortable, because true generosity often does. After careful discussion, the monastery continued helping. Not recklessly, not blindly, but generously. Winter eventually arrived. Food remained sufficient, not abundant, but sufficient. The fear had exaggerated the danger, as fear often does. Years flowed onward. Kenji grew older. His hair turned grey. His responsibilities increased. The monastery changed around him. Students arrived. Students departed. Seasons passed. The central candle remained. Every evening, it continued lighting others. One flame becoming many, without loss, without effort, without concern. The symbol deepened over time. One autumn evening, a traveler asked, "What is the greatest form of generosity?" The old monk thought carefully, then answered, "Giving what is needed." The traveler nodded. "Money? Sometimes. Food? Sometimes. What else?" Kenji smiled. "Attention." The traveler looked surprised. The monk continued, "Listening, patience, encouragement, forgiveness." The firelight danced across the walls. Many people possess things. Few offer presents. The traveler remained silent. The lesson felt true. Late in life, Kenji spent many evenings sitting beside the candles, watching them illuminate the hall, watching one flame become many. The sight never grew old. One winter night, a young novice approached. The boy looked troubled. "I want to help people." Kenji smiled. "A good beginning." The novice hesitated. "But I'm afraid." "Of what?" The answer came quietly. "Having less." The old monk nodded, because he remembered, very clearly. For many years, he had carried the same fear. The older monk pointed toward the candles. The novice followed his gaze. The hall glowed warmly. The central candle still burned, surrounded by dozens of others. Kenji asked, "What happened to the first flame?" The boy smiled. "It lit the others." "And what did it lose?" The novice looked carefully, then slowly shook his head. "Nothing." The old monk smiled. "Exactly. And perhaps that is the lesson. Many people fear generosity because they imagine life as a fixed amount of happiness, a fixed amount of success, a fixed amount of love, a fixed amount of opportunity. If someone else receives more, they assume they must receive less. But many of the most important things in life do not work this way. Knowledge grows when shared. Kindness grows when shared. Compassion grows when shared. Encouragement grows when shared. Love grows when shared. Like a candle lighting another candle, the original flame remains, yet the world becomes brighter. The Buddha often taught that generosity is not merely an action, it is a way of relating to life, a recognition that clinging creates fear while sharing creates freedom. The generous heart trusts abundance where fear predicts scarcity, not because resources are infinite, because connection is. So when opportunities to give appear, remember the candle. Not every gift must be large. Not every act must be dramatic. Sometimes a few kind words change a life. Sometimes a moment of patience changes a day. Sometimes a small act of generosity travels farther than we ever see. One flame, then another, until the darkness becomes light, and no flame loses itself in the process. The city of Shorin was famous for its walls. Massive stone walls surrounded the entire city. They stood taller than 3 men, thick enough for guards to patrol along their tops, strong enough to withstand storms, armies, and the passage of time. People spoke proudly about those walls. Visitors admired them. Merchants trusted them. Citizens felt protected by them. The walls represented safety, security, control, or so everyone believed. Among the people living inside the city was a man named Tetsu. Tetsu spent most of his life trying to feel secure. He accumulated savings, purchased property, stored food, made careful plans, avoided unnecessary risks. Whenever uncertainty appeared, he searched for ways to eliminate it. His efforts impressed many people. Neighbors called him responsible, practical, prepared. Yet despite all his precautions, Tetsu rarely felt at peace. Every solution created a new concern. Every achievement produced another fear. If money increased, he worried about losing it. If business improved, he worried about decline. If plans succeeded, he worried about future failure. Security always seemed just beyond reach, like a destination that moved farther away whenever he approached. The pattern exhausted him, though he rarely admitted it. One spring morning, news spread throughout the city. A wandering monk had arrived. His name was Master Kenzan. Travelers spoke highly of him, not because he performed miracles, because he asked uncomfortable questions, questions that lingered, questions that quietly changed people. Curiosity eventually brought Tetsu to one of the monks' gatherings. The old teacher sat beneath a large tree near the market. His robe was worn, his belongings minimal, yet his presence seemed remarkably peaceful. Several villagers asked questions. One man asked about happiness, another asked about success. Eventually, Tetsu raised his hand. "Master, how does a person become secure?" The monk smiled. "Secure from what?" The answer immediately irritated him. "Loss, failure, misfortune. Uncertainty. The monk nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "Have you succeeded?" Tetsu frowned. "At what?" "Becoming secure." The crowd laughed softly. The question landed more deeply than he expected, because the answer was obvious. No. Despite years of effort, complete security remained absent. The monk smiled gently. Interesting. Several days later, Tetsu encountered Kenzan again. This time the monk was walking through the city alone. On impulse, Tetsu joined him. They wandered narrow streets, past merchants and craftsmen. Eventually, they reached the city's main gate. The gate was enormous. Heavy wooden doors, reinforced with iron. Guards stood nearby. The structure symbolized everything the city valued: protection, control, safety. Kenzan stopped, then asked, "What keeps the city safe?" Tetsu looked confused. "The walls, the gate, the guards." The monk nodded. "Good." Then he pointed toward the open gate. People entered freely. People departed freely. The city remained busy. The monk smiled. "What keeps them inside?" The answer seemed obvious. "Nothing." Kenzan nodded. "Exactly." The conversation ended there, at least externally. Internally, it had only begun. Over the following weeks, Tetsu found himself thinking about the gate. The city possessed walls, yet the gate remained open. People could leave whenever they wished. The image returned repeatedly, though he wasn't entirely sure why. One evening, while reviewing financial records, he noticed something. His accounts looked excellent, better than ever. Yet anxiety remained. The familiar tension still occupied his chest. The same worry, the same fear, the same restlessness. The realization disturbed him, because it suggested the problem might not be external. The possibility felt uncomfortable. If money wasn't the solution, if planning wasn't the solution, if preparation wasn't the solution, then what exactly was he searching for? Several days later, he visited the monk again. "I've been thinking about the gate." Kenzan smiled. "A dangerous activity." The answer made him laugh despite himself. The monk continued, "What did you discover?" Tetsu hesitated, then answered honestly, "Nothing outside seems capable of making me feel secure." The old man nodded. "A valuable observation." The younger man frowned. "Then what am I supposed to do?" The monk looked toward a nearby pond. For several moments, he remained silent, then asked, "If a bird sits inside an open cage, is it trapped?" Tetsu considered carefully. "No." "Why not?" "The door is open." The monk smiled. "Exactly." The answer felt familiar, yet its meaning remained just out of reach. The following month brought difficulties. A business deal failed unexpectedly. The loss was not catastrophic, but significant. Several years earlier, the event would have consumed him. Days of worry, weeks of frustration, months of resentment. Instead, something different happened. The anxiety appeared. Then he remembered the gate. The loss existed, but so did his reaction. One belonged to reality. The other belonged to him. The distinction mattered. For the first time, he noticed how often suffering continued after circumstances ended. The event closed. The mind remained trapped. The gate stood open. Yet the prisoner refused to leave. One afternoon, Kenzan invited him on a short journey outside the city. They followed a forest path leading toward the mountains. After several hours, they reached a small abandoned shrine. The building was old, weathered, partially collapsed. Yet something unusual caught Tetsu's attention. A rusted iron cage sat nearby. Inside the cage perched a small bird. The sight immediately upset him. Who trapped it? The monk walked closer, then smiled. "Look carefully." The younger man approached, then froze. The cage door stood completely open. The bird could leave at any moment, yet remained inside. The realization felt strangely powerful. The monk said nothing. He didn't need to. The lesson already spoke clearly. The image followed Tetsu for weeks. The open cage, the open gate, the bird that stayed. Gradually, he began recognizing similar patterns inside himself. Old fears he continued carrying. Old worries he continued repeating. Old assumptions he never questioned. No one forced him to hold them. The door stood open, yet habit remained stronger than freedom. One evening, while sitting alone, he asked himself a simple question. What am I afraid will happen if I let go? The answer arrived immediately. Anything, everything, the unknown. The realization surprised him, because uncertainty itself had become the enemy. Not specific outcomes, uncertainty. And uncertainty, by definition, could never be eliminated completely. He had spent years fighting something impossible to defeat. As the seasons changed, so did Tetsu. Not dramatically, gradually. He still planned, still worked, still prepared responsibly. The difference was attachment. He stopped demanding guarantees from life, stopped expecting certainty where none existed, stopped treating uncertainty as imprisonment. The shift felt subtle, yet transformative. For the first time in years, moments of genuine peace appeared. Not because circumstances improved, because resistance softened. One autumn evening, a young merchant visited him. The man looked overwhelmed. "I cannot relax." Tetsu smiled. The statement sounded familiar. The merchant described endless worries, competition, money, failure, future risks. The list never ended. After listening patiently, Tetsu asked, "Have you ever seen the city gate?" The young man looked confused. "Of course. Is it locked?" "No." The merchant frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" Tetsu smiled. "Everything." Years passed. Kenzan eventually departed. The monk continued traveling, teaching, questioning, leaving lessons behind wherever he went. Tetsu never saw him again, yet the teachings remained, especially the gate. The image became a compass. Whenever anxiety returned, he remembered. Whenever fear tightened around him, he remembered. Whenever he felt trapped, he remembered. The gate stood open. The prison often existed only in the mind. Late in life, Tetsu developed a habit. Every morning, he walked to the city gate. Sometimes he stayed only a few minutes, sometimes longer. The guards eventually stopped asking questions. The old man simply sat and watched. People entering, people leaving, the endless movement of life. One morning, a child approached him. "Why do you come here every day?" Tetsu smiled. The question deserved a good answer, so he thought carefully, then replied, "To remember." "What?" The old man looked toward the open gate, then answered, "That freedom isn't where most people look for it." The child nodded politely, though he clearly didn't understand. Tetsu laughed. Neither had he once. Near the end of his life, he stood beside the gate one final time. The city remained busy. The walls remained strong. The guards remained vigilant. Everything looked much the same. Yet his understanding had changed completely. The walls protected the city, but they could not create peace. The gate allowed movement, but it could not create freedom. Those things emerged elsewhere, inside. The realization felt simple, obvious even, yet it had taken decades to discover. And perhaps that is the lesson. Many people spend their lives searching for freedom in external conditions. More money, more control, more certainty, more security, more favorable circumstances. Some of these things help. None provide complete liberation, because the deepest forms of imprisonment often exist within: fear, attachment, resentment, identity. The belief that peace depends entirely on circumstances. The Buddha taught that true freedom comes from understanding the mind, not controlling the world. The gate with no lock reminds us that many of the doors we fear are already open. The cage stands open. The gate stands open. The path stands open. Yet habit keeps us circling inside familiar walls. Freedom begins the moment we notice, the moment we question, the moment we realize that uncertainty is not the same as captivity, loss is not the same as imprisonment, change is not the same as danger, life remains unpredictable, the gate remains open, and every day we are invited to walk through it, not into another place, into a different relationship with the one we are already in. For the greatest prison has no walls, and the greatest freedom requires no key. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. In a quiet valley between two blue mountains, there was a small Buddhist monastery where the mornings began before sunrise and the evenings ended with the sound of a wooden bell. The monastery was not famous. Pilgrims rarely came. It had no golden statues, no tall gates, and no walls painted with bright colors. It was built from old wood and smooth stone, with roofs that curved gently toward the sky. Behind the monastery grew a bamboo grove. The bamboo was tall, green, and graceful. When the wind moved through it, the leaves whispered like soft rain. The monks often walked there after meditation, letting the sound of the bamboo calm their thoughts. Among the monks lived a young novice named Sanu. Sanu was sincere, hard-working, and determined. He woke before everyone else. He swept the courtyard until every fallen leaf was gone. He memorized teachings late into the night. He sat in meditation without moving, even when his knees ached and his back burned. The older monks admired his discipline, but they also noticed something troubling. Sanu was too hard on himself. If his mind wandered during meditation, he felt ashamed. If he forgot a verse, he called himself foolish. If another novice corrected him, his face tightened with embarrassment. He believed that to become wise, he had to be strong like a stone. One evening, after the final chant, Sanu went to the abbot and bowed. "Master," he said, "I want to become unshakable. I want a mind that never bends, never fears, never doubts, and never breaks." The abbot was an old monk named Venerable Ananda. His face was lined like dry earth, but his eyes were soft and bright. He looked at Sanu for a long moment. Then he said, "Come with me." They walked through the quiet courtyard, past the stone lanterns, past the meditation hall, and into the bamboo grove. The evening air was cool. The sky was deep blue, and a thin moon rested above the mountains. Venerable Ananda pointed to the bamboo. "What do you see?" he asked. Sanu looked carefully. "I see bamboo, master. Tall bamboo, straight bamboo, strong bamboo." The old monk nodded. "And what do you think makes it strong?" Sanu answered quickly. "It stands upright. It does not collapse. It rises above the earth." Venerable Ananda smiled faintly. "Perhaps," he said, "or perhaps its strength is something else." Sanu did not understand, but he said nothing. The next morning, the sky changed. Dark clouds gathered over the mountains. The air became heavy and still. Birds flew low. The leaves of the bamboo grove stopped whispering and became silent. By midday, rain began to fall. At first, it was gentle. Then it grew harder. The monastery roofs rattled. Water ran down the stone steps. The wind pushed against the wooden doors. By evening, a fierce storm had entered the valley. The monks closed the shutters and secured the lamps. Thunder rolled across the sky. Rain struck the earth so hard it sounded like thousands of drums. Sanu sat in the meditation hall, trying to keep his mind still. But his thoughts were restless. What if the roof breaks? What if the old trees fall? What if the storehouse floods? What if I am afraid because my practice is weak? He clenched his hands in his lap and tried to force his thoughts into silence. But the harder he tried, the louder they became. Finally, unable to bear it, he rose and walked to the doorway. Through the rain, he could see the old pine tree near the monastery gate. It had stood there longer than anyone could remember. Its trunk was thick. Its branches were heavy. Its roots gripped the earth like giant fingers. Sanu had always admired that tree. It is strong, he thought. That is how I must become. Then a violent gust of wind struck the valley. The pine tree groaned, its branches twisted, its trunk shuddered. The wind pressed harder and harder against it. The tree resisted, stiff and proud. Then, with a sound like the cracking of the earth itself, the pine split. Half of it tore away and crashed to the ground. Sanu stepped back, startled. The next morning, the storm had passed. The monastery was wet and quiet. Mist floated between the trees. Broken branches lay across the path. The air smelled of rain, leaves, and fresh mud. Sanu hurried to the gate. The great pine had fallen. Its roots were torn from the earth. Its thick trunk lay shattered across the ground. The tree that had seemed so powerful was now broken and still. Sanu stood there in silence. Then Venerable Ananda appeared beside him. "You admired this tree," the abbot said gently. "Yes, master," Sanu whispered. "It was strong." The old monk looked toward the bamboo grove. "Come." They walked together through the wet courtyard and into the grove. Sanu expected to see destruction. He expected the bamboo to be broken, scattered, flattened by the storm. But the bamboo was still there. Its thin green stalks were bent low beneath the weight of rainwater, but they were not broken. Some leaned almost to the ground. Others curved like bows. Drops of water slid down their leaves and fell softly into the mud. Then, as the morning sun warmed the grove, the bamboo began to rise. Slowly, quietly. One stalk lifted, then another, then another. By midday, the grove stood tall again, shining with rain. Sanu stared in wonder. "The bamboo survived," he said. Venerable Ananda nodded. "Because it knew how to bend." Sanu lowered his eyes. The old monk continued. The pine resisted the storm. The bamboo moved with it. The pine believed strength meant never yielding. The bamboo understood that yielding is sometimes what allows life to continue. Sanu was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "Master, should we not try to be strong?" The abbot smiled. "We should, but you must understand what strength is. A rigid mind breaks under suffering. A flexible mind receives suffering, learns from it, and rises again." Sanu listened carefully. "Pain will come," said the abbot. "Loss will come. Change will come. People will disappoint you. Your body will grow tired. Your thoughts will wander. Plans will fail. The world will not always obey your wishes. If you make your heart hard, You may think you are protected, but hardness cannot protect you from life. It only makes it easier for you to break. The words entered Sanu slowly. For many days after the storm, he thought about the bamboo. When he meditated and his mind wandered, he no longer clenched his jaw. Instead, he gently noticed the thought and returned to his breath. When he made a mistake while chanting, he bowed, corrected himself, and continued. When another novice spilled rice during the midday meal, Sanu began to scold him, then stopped. He remembered the bamboo bending in the rain, so he simply helped clean the floor. Weeks passed. One afternoon, a traveler arrived at the monastery. He was angry and exhausted. His clothes were muddy and his face was full of frustration. He demanded food. He complained about the road. He criticized the monastery for being too simple. He mocked the monks for wasting their lives in silence. Sanu felt heat rise in his chest. He wanted to defend the monastery. He wanted to prove the traveler wrong. He wanted to speak sharply and show that he was not weak. But then he heard the wind moving through the bamboo grove. Soft, patient, untroubled. Sanu breathed in. Then he bowed and said, "You must have had a difficult journey. Please sit. I will bring you tea." The traveler seemed surprised. He sat down. Sanu brought tea, rice, and warm water for washing. The man ate in silence. Slowly, the anger left his face. After a while, he said, "I spoke rudely." Sanu answered, "The road was hard." The traveler looked down at his bowl. "My son is ill," he said quietly. "I am afraid he will die. I did not know where to place my fear, so I placed it here." Sanu felt his anger dissolve. In that moment, he understood something. The traveler's harsh words had been like wind. If Sanu had stood rigidly against them, there would have been a storm between them. But because he had bent, something hidden had been revealed. Fear, grief, love. That evening, Sanu went to Venerable Ananda. "Master," he said, "today I bent, and I did not break." The old monk smiled. "And what did you discover?" Sanu thought for a moment. "I discovered that bending is not weakness. It gives space for compassion." The abbot nodded. "Yes, a mind that bends can listen. A heart that bends can understand. A life that bends can survive many storms." Years passed. Sanu grew older. His face became calmer. His movements became slower. He became known not for strictness, but for gentleness. Young novices came to him with their frustrations. One said, "I cannot meditate. My mind is too restless." Sanu would answer, "Then sit with a restless mind. Do not fight it like an enemy. Bow to it and return to the breath." Another said, "Someone insulted me, and I cannot stop thinking about it." Sanu would say, "Do not build a house for the insult. Let it pass through like wind through bamboo." Another said, "I am afraid of change." And Sanu would lead them to the grove. There, beneath the green stalks, he would tell them the story of the storm. He would point to the bamboo and say, "Look carefully. It does not survive because the world is gentle. It survives because it knows how to move with what comes." One winter, many years later, another storm entered the valley. This storm was stronger than the first. Rain fell for 3 days. The mountain paths turned to rivers. The old storage shed collapsed. Several trees were uprooted. The monks were frightened. But Sanu, now an elder, walked calmly through the monastery, helping secure doors, comforting novices, and carrying supplies to dry ground. A young monk asked him, "Are you not afraid?" Sanu looked toward the bamboo grove, swaying wildly in the rain. "I am afraid," he said. But fear is also wind. I do not need to become hard against it. The young monk listened. Sanu continued, "Let the body feel fear. Let the mind know fear. But do not let fear become the master of the house." The storm passed by morning. Again, the bamboo rose. Some stalks were bruised. Some leaves were torn. Some branches had snapped. But the grove was alive. Sanu stood among them, touching one wet green stalk with his old hand. He remembered the young novice he had once been, the boy who wanted to become unshakable, the boy who believed wisdom meant never bending. Now he understood. Nothing alive is truly unshakable. The body changes, the heart changes, the world changes, the people we love change. Even mountains are slowly shaped by wind and rain. Peace does not come from refusing change. Peace comes from learning how to meet change without losing the kindness within us. That evening, as the monks gathered for meditation, Sanu spoke softly. "When suffering comes, do not ask, 'How can I make myself hard enough to never feel this?' Ask instead, 'How can I remain open without being destroyed? How can I bend without losing my roots?'" The hall was silent. Outside, the bamboo moved gently in the night breeze. Sanu closed his eyes. He could hear the soft rustling of leaves. It sounded like the earth itself was breathing. And in that sound, he heard the lesson again. Be rooted, but not rigid. Be steady, but not stiff. Be strong, but not hard. For the storm does not ask our permission before it arrives. But if we learn to bend with wisdom, breathe with patience, and rise again with compassion, then even the fiercest winds can become part of the path. And like bamboo after rain, we may discover that what bowed low in the storm can still rise toward the light. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. On the northern edge of an ancient forest, where rolling hills met the foothills of distant mountains, there stood a magnificent oak tree. It was older than anyone could remember. Generations had grown up beneath its branches. Children had climbed its sturdy limbs. Travelers had rested in its shade. Birds had built countless nests among its leaves. The villagers often said that the tree seemed eternal. It had survived storms, droughts, harsh winters, and scorching summers. Year after year, it remained, steady, strong, reliable. To many people, it appeared unchanging. Yet the tree knew a secret. Every year, it had to let go. Among the villagers lived a young man named Daichi. Unlike the great oak, Daichi struggled with letting go. He held tightly to almost everything. Old disappointments, past mistakes, broken friendships, lost opportunities. Even possessions he no longer needed filled his small home. He kept old clothes he never wore, letters he never read, objects he never used. Every item seemed connected to a memory. Every memory felt impossible to release. Whenever something ended, Daichi resisted. Whenever life changed, he suffered. Deep down, he believed that holding on would somehow protect him. Yet the opposite seemed true. The more tightly he clung to things, the heavier his life became. One autumn afternoon, after another day spent worrying about the past, Daichi wandered into the forest. The air was cool, the sunlight softer than summer. Leaves drifted lazily through the sky. Gold, amber, crimson. The entire forest seemed painted with color. Eventually he reached the great oak. Its enormous branches stretched overhead. Thousands of leaves still covered the tree, yet many had already begun to fall. Daichi sat beneath it. For a while he simply watched. A breeze moved through the branches. Several leaves detached and floated downward. None seemed to resist. None appeared afraid. They simply released their grip and drifted gently toward the earth. As he watched, an elderly monk approached along the forest path. Daiichi recognized him immediately. It was Venerable Soren, a teacher who occasionally visited the village. The monk smiled and sat beside him. Neither spoke for several minutes. The forest seemed to encourage silence. Finally, Soren asked, "What brings you here today?" Daiichi sighed. "My mind." The old monk nodded. "A familiar visitor." The young man laughed softly. Then he told the monk about his struggles, the regrets he could not forget, the relationships he could not move beyond, the memories he constantly replayed, the future he wished had happened. When he finished, the monk looked up at the oak tree. Then he asked, "Do you think the tree is sad about its leaves?" Daiichi frowned. "What?" The monk pointed upward. "The leaves. Do you think the tree mourns everyone that falls?" Daiichi looked at the branches. "I don't know." Soren smiled. "Then perhaps we should watch." So they sat together beneath the oak. The afternoon slowly unfolded. The wind came and went. Leaves continued falling. The tree remained. Finally, the monk spoke again. "Tell me, why do leaves fall?" "Because winter is coming." "Exactly." The old monk nodded. "The tree understands something many people forget." "What?" "That holding on forever prevents new growth." Daiichi listened carefully. The monk continued. "If the tree refused to release its leaves, what would happen when spring arrived?" The young man thought for a moment. There would be no room for new ones. The old monk smiled. "Exactly." The answer seemed simple, almost too simple, yet something about it lingered. Over the following weeks, Daiichi found himself returning to the oak tree often. Each visit revealed new changes. More leaves fell, more branches became bare. The transformation seemed gradual and effortless. The tree never appeared frightened, never desperate, never resistant. It simply participated in the season. One particularly windy afternoon, Daiichi arrived to find almost half the leaves gone. The ground beneath the tree glowed with autumn colors. It looked beautiful, yet the tree appeared less full than before. A thought suddenly entered his mind. Perhaps letting go was not destruction. Perhaps it was part of a cycle. Still, understanding a lesson and living it are very different things. A few days later, Daiichi received news that an old friend was moving far away. The two had grown distant over the years, but the announcement still stirred sadness. His first reaction was familiar: resistance. Why must people leave? Why must relationships change? Why can't things remain as they are? Then he remembered the tree. That evening he walked to the forest. The oak stood quietly beneath the fading light. More leaves had fallen. The branches looked increasingly bare. Yet somehow the tree seemed no less alive. Standing beneath it, Daiichi realized something. The tree did not cling to what had served its purpose. It trusted the seasons, and perhaps life required the same trust. Winter eventually arrived. Snow covered the forest. The great oak stood completely bare. No leaves remained. At first glance, it looked almost lifeless. Many travelers passing through the forest assumed it was dead, but it was not. Beneath the surface, unseen processes continued. The roots remained alive. The trunk remained strong. The tree was preparing, waiting, trusting. One morning, Daiichi visited after a fresh snowfall. The world was silent. Snow covered every branch. The forest seemed asleep. As he stood there, he realized how much the tree had taught him. The oak no longer looked empty. It looked patient. There was a difference. Months passed. Winter slowly loosened its grip. The snow melted. The days grew longer. Birds returned. The air softened. And then, one morning, Daiichi noticed something remarkable. Tiny green buds had appeared along the branches. Small, fragile, almost invisible, yet unmistakably alive. A few weeks later, fresh leaves emerged. New life where old life had once been. The cycle continued. Not because the tree fought change, but because it accepted it. That spring, Daiichi began making changes of his own. He sorted through possessions he had kept for years. Some he donated, some he gave away, some he simply released. At first it felt uncomfortable, then surprisingly freeing. He also began letting go of old resentments, not all at once, slowly, patiently, like leaves falling one by one. Some memories still hurt, some losses still saddened him, but he no longer carried them quite so tightly. Years later, Daiichi became known for his calm nature. People often sought his advice during difficult transitions. One young woman came after a painful breakup. An elderly man came after retirement. A merchant came after losing his business. Each wanted the same thing, a way to avoid change, a way to keep life exactly as it had been. Rather than giving immediate answers, Daiichi often invited them to walk into the forest. There, beneath the great oak, he would ask, "What season is the tree in?" The question often confused them. At first, then gradually they understood. Life contains seasons. Some seasons bring growth, others bring endings, some bring abundance, others require release. No season lasts forever. That is both the challenge and the gift. As an old man, Daiichi continued visiting the oak. One autumn evening, many decades after his first conversation with Venerable Soren, he sat beneath the tree once again. Leaves drifted gently around him. The setting sun painted the forest gold. He watched a single leaf detach from a branch high above. It spun slowly through the air, dancing, turning, floating. Eventually, it landed softly upon the earth. And in that moment, Daiichi understood the lesson more deeply than ever before. The leaf did not fail. The tree did not lose. Nothing had gone wrong. The leaf had simply completed its time. Its journey continued in another form. The earth would receive it. The soil would nourish future growth. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was truly separate. The same was true of so many things in life: relationships, dreams, chapters, roles, possessions, even certain versions of ourselves. Not everything is meant to remain forever. Some things arrive to teach us. Some arrive to comfort us. Some arrive to transform us. And then they leave. Not because they lacked value, but because their purpose has been fulfilled. The oak understood this. The seasons understood this. Nature understood this. Perhaps wisdom was simply learning to understand it too. As twilight settled over the forest, Daiichi closed his eyes and listened to the wind moving through the branches. The sound was gentle, peaceful, almost like a whisper. And if the wind could speak, it might have said, "Do not fear letting go. The tree does not mourn every leaf. It trusts the spring that has not yet arrived. Trust the seasons of your own life as well. For sometimes the very thing you are afraid to release is making space for something beautiful that has not yet begun to grow." In a remote valley, nestled between snow-capped mountains, there stood a village that knew the rhythm of the seasons better than the passage of years. The villagers measured time not by calendars, but by nature. The arrival of swallows marked the beginning of spring. The blooming of wildflowers announced summer. The golden harvest signaled autumn, and the first snowfall declared the arrival of winter. For generations, life followed this cycle. The people respected it, trusted it, lived alongside it. Yet every winter brought challenges. The days became short, the nights became long. The fields lay dormant beneath blankets of snow. The mountains disappeared behind storms. Travel became difficult. Food became precious. And many villagers quietly endured a heaviness they rarely spoke about. Among them lived a young woman named Aya. Aya had once been known for her cheerful spirit. As a child, she laughed easily. As a teenager, she dreamed endlessly. As a young adult, she believed life would unfold exactly as she imagined. But life rarely follows our plans. Several difficult years had changed her. Her mother had fallen ill. The family farm struggled. A man she hoped to marry had moved away and never returned. One disappointment followed another. Nothing catastrophic, nothing dramatic. Just enough sorrow, repeated often enough, to slowly dim her spirit. By the time she reached her late 20s, Aya no longer expected much from life. She still worked hard. She still helped others. She still smiled when required. But her joy felt distant, like a memory from another season. Then came the hardest winter anyone could remember. Snow arrived early. Storms lasted for weeks. The river froze. Roads disappeared beneath drifts of ice. The village became isolated. Many people worried. Some feared food shortages. Others feared illness. The darkness seemed endless. As winter deepened, so did Aya's sadness. Every morning she looked out the window and saw only white fields and grey skies. Every evening, darkness arrived before she felt ready for it. The world appeared lifeless, silent, frozen. One particularly cold morning, Aya walked into the forest to gather firewood. The air stung her cheeks. Her breath formed clouds before her face. Snow covered every branch. The entire landscape seemed asleep. As she moved through the woods, she thought about all the things she had lost, all the things that had not happened, all the things she wished were different. The more she thought, the heavier her heart became. Eventually, she stopped beside an old pine tree. The forest was completely silent, or so she thought. Then she heard it, a song, soft at first, almost impossible to notice, a single bird singing somewhere among the snow-covered branches. Aya looked around in surprise. Surely she had imagined it. Birds did not sing in winter, not here, not now. Yet the song came again, clear, gentle, unmistakably real. She followed the sound. Eventually she found the source. A small brown bird perched on a branch. Its feathers puffed against the cold. Its tiny body seemed fragile against the vast winter landscape, and yet it continued singing. The sight felt strangely absurd. Everything around it appeared frozen. The sky was grey, the trees were bare, the ground was covered in snow, and still the birds sang. Aya stood watching for several minutes. Then she shook her head. "Foolish bird." The words escaped before she could stop them. The bird, of course, offered no reply. Eventually it flew away, yet the image remained in her mind. Over the following days, she heard the bird again, always singing, always cheerful, always appearing when the world seemed at its coldest. The mystery began to irritate her. One morning, while delivering supplies to an elderly monk who lived near the edge of the village, she mentioned it. The monk's name was Tenzin. He had lived in the valley for many decades. People often sought his advice, though his answers were rarely straightforward. Aya set down the basket she carried. Then she asked, "Why would a bird sing in winter?" The old monk smiled. "Why indeed?" Aya frowned. "There is nothing to sing about." Tenzin looked amused. "Nothing? The trees are bare. Yes. The fields are frozen. Yes. The days are short. Yes. The world is asleep." The monk nodded. Then he asked, "Do you think the bird doesn't know that?" Aya hesitated. The question felt strange. Of course the bird knew. It lived in the same winter, the same cold, the same darkness. The old monk poured tea into 2 small cups. Steam rose gently into the air. Then he said, "Perhaps the bird sings not because winter is absent." He handed her a cup. "Perhaps it sings despite winter." The words lingered, but Aya wasn't convinced. The answer felt too simple, too optimistic. Life wasn't a song. Life was difficult. Life was loss. Life was uncertainty. Birds could afford to sing. People carried responsibilities. That evening she returned home unconvinced. Yet the next morning she heard the bird again, and the morning after that, and the one after that. Its song seemed to appear precisely when the weather felt most severe. Eventually, curiosity overcame irritation. One day she followed the bird deeper into the forest. The snow was fresh, the air perfectly still. The bird moved from branch to branch, singing as it went. Finally, it settled near a clearing where sunlight broke through the trees. Aya sat quietly nearby. For a long time she simply listened. The song wasn't extraordinary. It wasn't louder than other birds. It wasn't more beautiful. Yet within the silence of winter, it felt important, almost courageous. As she listened, a realization slowly emerged. The bird wasn't waiting for spring. It wasn't postponing its song until conditions improved. It wasn't saying, "I will sing when the snow melts. I will sing when the flowers return. I will sing when life becomes easier." It sang now, in the middle of winter, in the middle of uncertainty, in the middle of cold and darkness. The insight unsettled her, because she realized she had been doing the opposite. For years, she had postponed her happiness. She had been telling herself, "I will be happy when life improves. I will be happy when things return to normal. I will be happy when my circumstances change." Yet those conditions kept moving further away, like a horizon, always visible, never reached. The winter continued, but something inside Aya began to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, slowly. One morning she noticed the beauty of sunlight reflecting on snow. Another day she enjoyed sharing tea with a neighbor. Another day she laughed unexpectedly during a conversation. Small moments, ordinary moments. Moments she might previously have overlooked. The hardships remained. The cold remained. The uncertainty remained. Yet she discovered that joy and difficulty could exist together. One did not have to wait for the other to disappear. Several weeks later, a fierce storm struck the valley, the worst of the season. Wind howled through the mountains. Snow piled against doors. Many villagers stayed indoors for days. When the storm finally passed, Aya walked into the forest once more. The landscape looked transformed. Branches had fallen. Paths had disappeared. Everything seemed buried beneath fresh snow. For a moment she wondered whether the little bird had survived. Then she heard it, faintly, somewhere beyond the trees. The same song, the same steady melody, the same quiet courage. And for the first time, Aya smiled before hearing the entire song. Years passed. The difficult winter eventually ended. Spring returned, as it always does. Snow melted, streams flowed once more. Flowers appeared, birds filled the forests. Yet Aya never forgot the lesson, because she realized the bird had never truly been teaching her about winter. It had been teaching her about life. Every life contains winters, periods of loss, periods of uncertainty, periods when joy feels distant, periods when the future appears hidden. Many people spend those seasons waiting for life to improve before allowing themselves to live fully, waiting for perfect conditions before allowing themselves to hope, waiting for spring before allowing themselves to sing. But the little bird had shown another way. One autumn evening, many years later, a young villager came seeking Aya's advice. The young woman had recently suffered several disappointments. Nothing seemed to be going according to plan. "I feel stuck," she admitted. "I keep waiting for things to get better." Aya listened quietly. Then she smiled. "Let me tell you about a bird." The young woman looked confused, but Aya continued. She told the story of the hardest winter, the silent forest, the tiny bird, the unexpected song. When she finished, the young woman sat quietly for a long time. Then she asked, "So, what was the lesson?" Aya looked toward the mountains. The evening sky glowed softly above them. Then she answered, "The bird never waited for spring to begin singing." Silence followed. Then understanding slowly appeared on the young woman's face. Years later, long after Aya herself had grown old, people in the valley still told the story. Children learned it, travelers carried it to distant places, and every winter, whenever someone heard a bird singing unexpectedly among the snow-covered trees, they remembered. Life will always contain winters. No one escapes them. Loss comes, change comes, disappointment comes, but joy does not belong only to spring. Peace does not belong only to easy seasons. Hope does not belong only to those whose lives are perfect. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is sing anyway. Not because winter isn't real, not because suffering doesn't exist, but because the heart is capable of holding both sorrow and beauty at the same time. And perhaps that is the lesson of the bird. Do not wait for life to become perfect before allowing yourself to live. Do not wait for every problem to disappear before allowing yourself to smile. Do not wait for spring before allowing yourself to sing. The snow may still fall. The winds may still blow. The nights may still be long. Yet somewhere within you, a song remains. And if a small bird can find its voice in the middle of winter, perhaps we can too. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.